Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Shanynthia Gardner. Shanynthia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. Not much is known about her childhood except that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who lived in a cozy wooden house in Madison, Alabama. Shaninthia's childhood and youth passed as normal as any other girl of her time. Shanynthia was a young girl with curly brown hair, slim and beautiful. She was always surrounded by loyal friends and showed outstanding talent. Shanynthia was full of creative spirit, had a unique talent for songwriting and a passion for music. She expressed herself through singing and attracted the attention of the local people. In addition to singing, Shanynthia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She had the ability to turn everyday moments into works of art in front of the camera. Despite her diverse interests, Shanynthia was a charitable woman who attended church regularly and took good care of her family. Everything in Shaninthia's life seemed to be preordained and promised a bright future. Shanynthia was 14 when she met Daryl Clayton through mutual friends. They quickly became friends and their relationship became more serious after graduating from high school, becoming an official couple. They spent a lot of time together and were considered serious and stable young people. However, their crime records had some questionable details. Both had minor crimes such as traffic violations and disorderly conduct on the street. In 2008, Daryl was charged with assaulting a woman, even though the act was unintentional. He faced severe punishment, but all charges were later dropped. Shanynthia and Daryl were not officially married but lived together. In 2008, they had a son named Dee. Shanynthia became a caring mother, taking care of not only her son but also Daryl's 2 children from a previous relationship. Daryl's mother, Sonia Clayton, considered Shanynthia a family member, not just her son's lover. However, their relationship did not last. Although the reason is unknown, they kept in touch after the breakup. For Daryl, Shanynthia was still a good wife and a caring mother. When her son Dee was only 2 years old, Shanynthia was involved in a small incident, possibly a parking ticket or a small argument. This was insignificant compared to what would happen in her future. Marrying Martin Gardner opened a new chapter in Shaninthia's life. This union brought joy and stability to her life. Shanynthia won Martin over with her kindness and love for her children, which was reflected in her gentleness and intelligence. Their love story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to live together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives. After the celebration, they had their first son, Telone, followed by baby Saya in 2014. Soon after, their 2 daughters Savi and Yazzie were born, bringing happiness to their family. In total, Martin and Shanynthia have 4 children together and 1 child from Shaninthia's previous relationship. As a young mother, her children have always been her #1 priority. She enjoys working part-time at Children's Hospital and is actively involved in a fundraising organization to help children. It is her passion and purpose in life. On a normal Friday, July 1, 2016. Around noon, Shanynthia called her husband, Martin. Her voice was completely calm. She told him that she was going to take the children to the movies. There was no indication that something terrible was going to happen that day. At that moment, they was having a quiet conversation when a sudden and confusing event occurred. Shanynthia suddenly changed her attitude and took a kitchen knife into the living room. She attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yazzie, leaving her defenseless and in a terrible situation. Yazzie's life was cut short abruptly by the person she loved and was closest to. Dee, the eldest child, was only 7 years old and witnessed this horrific scene. He was too young to understand what was happening, but he knew that he needed to act to save his younger brother and sister. Panicked and desperate, Dee ran out of the house. Shanynthia continued to hold the knife and chase her son. She rushed after Dee, but he screamed loudly, attracting the attention of the neighbors. Several neighbors heard his screams and rushed outside to see what was happening. They witnessed a horrifying scene that they could not forget in their minds. When they realized that Dee was being chased, but Shanynthia stopped. However, the horror was not over yet. Shanynthia returned to the house, where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went upstairs to the bedroom where the children were lying. Those were the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the horrifying scene quickly called the emergency services, asking for help and rescuing Dee and his siblings. None of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. The sheriff arrived at the scene and witnessed a strange scene inside the house at 7449 Southern Hill Road. They found Shanynthia covered in blood and her 4 children lying motionless, lifeless. The scene left everyone in shock. Shanynthia sat there, holding her cell phone and slowly dialing her husband, Martin. Her voice was soft but cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had happened in their lives was a horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and the special forces arrived at the scene, everything was over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been home to the happy Gardner family. Blood and horror were everywhere. Investigators found a bloody knife and witnessed the horrific incident. Chaplains came to help and were shocked by what had happened. Professionals were also ready to assist Dee, who was suffering from a horror that required immediate intervention. Shanynthia was arrested and held without bail. Her trial is scheduled for July 5th. The horrific events unfolding in Shanynthia Gardner's life have left society unable to remain indifferent. Although she has been portrayed as a monster, Shanynthia is still a mother and partner who radiates love, care, and joy. Her co-worker, Michelle Jaiman, has defended Shanynthia on social media and spoken out about the injustice of the charges. Michelle also emphasized the importance of considering postpartum depression in cases like this. Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that infanticide by mothers is rare and often accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed to the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, an expert in postpartum psychology and health, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. She emphasized that the two conditions are completely different, with different symptoms. In Shaninthia's case, Dr. Diane doubts that women with postpartum depression would commit such acts. Instead, she favors the possibility that Shanynthia suffered from psychosis. The investigation into Shanynthia Gardner's case has been fraught with difficulties. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, has chosen not to comment on the case to the media in its early stages, saying it is too early to discuss it. On July 5, 2016, Shanynthia did not speak at her trial, appearing only via video. Judge Lambert questioned her, but Shanynthia did not respond. After the trial, she was taken to the Institute of Mental Health. Shaninthia's family members were present in court but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor, Jennifer Nichols, plans to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. In January 2017, Shanynthia was formally charged with 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and chilling investigation continues, leaving the community waiting for justice and answers to many unanswered questions. The hearing was attended by Shaninthia's family members on the day of the tragedy. Sonia, Drill's mother, must have been devastated when she heard the news of the horrific tragedy. She rushed to the scene in a search for her nephew D. Sonia asserted that this action was completely unlike the Shanynthia she knew. Initially, she believed that something supernatural or demonic had caused the tragedy. However, as time passed and the initial shock subsided, Sonia began to consider possible reasons. She theorized that the couple may have been in the process of divorce. Shanynthia, fearful of raising 5 children on her own, may have made the terrifying decision to end it all. However, despite these speculations, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shanynthia she knew was not the person capable of such a terrible act. Dee's father did not believe Shanynthia was guilty. Although he was not the official guardian, he visited his son regularly after his separation from Shanynthia. However, the last time he saw his son was in November 2014. He noticed that Shanynthia was becoming more extreme in her actions and decisions. All attempts to contact her son failed and he was banned from interfering in her life. Shanintia's friends and family soon noticed a sudden change in her. She began to show unusual symptoms, from feeling irritable to deep anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, leading many to suspect that she was suffering from postpartum depression. The sudden change in Shaninthia's behavior shocked those around her. She had been a strong, dependable woman who had everything under control. But now, she seemed to have lost her temper, leaving many wondering what had happened. The first signs of trouble appeared in March 2015. Friends and family were puzzled. One day, Shanynthia left work early, picked up her 5 children, and drove off in an unknown direction. Her husband, Martin, thought his wife was just taking the children for a walk and relaxing in the park, as was her usual routine. However, after several hours, Martin was confused and decided to call the police. Shanynthia drove from Memphis to Corinth, 74 miles east, with her 5 children. She did not know anyone there and had no apparent reason for being there. She was later found in the emergency room at St. Francis Hospital, but police did not disclose any details. She had superficial cuts on her neck and wrists, possibly from a suicide attempt, but her children were too young to understand what was happening. After being brought home, Shanynthia began to act strangely. She told her husband Martin that someone had threatened their family, but did not provide any further information. This shocked Martin, who had never had any previous threats. When she was with family and friends, Shanynthia complained about her job and felt bad about it. She then began to say that some of her co-workers wanted to hurt her. Despite the unusual signs, Shanynthia did not exhibit abusive or violent behavior toward her children or others. The wait for trial was long and difficult, with significant delays due to multiple psychiatric evaluations of the defendant. In 2021, the final non-jury trial took place. The defense focused on Shaninthia's mental illness argument. The prosecutor acknowledged her mental condition, but argued that the defendant still had the ability to distinguish right from wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Ultimately, Shelby County Criminal Court Judge James rejected the defense. In December 2021, Shanynthia Gardner was found guilty on all charges against her. In February 2022, Shanynthia, 34, appeared in court to receive her sentence, with her husband Martin present. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder and 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Shanynthia will only be eligible for parole after serving 51 years, including the 5 years she has already served before sentencing. She will be eligible for parole at age 80, about 46 years from now. After the hearing, the prosecutor expressed approval of the sentence, saying it satisfied Martin's desire for justice for his children. Martin also felt relieved to know that Shanynthia would no longer have the opportunity to harm any more children. An evening vigil was held at Sonia family's apartment complex to remember the victims. Sonia stood among a crowd of neighbors, relatives, and police. Attendees held red and white candles, praying for the soul of the deceased. The Baptist minister said this was the first step in healing the community, and everyone could only support the surviving child and his father through this difficult time. Martin did not attend the memorial service because he was too sad. Sonia spoke to the press on his behalf. The leadership of the children's hospital where Shanynthia worked also sent condolences. Martin's colleagues set up a social media page to help him arrange the funeral for his 4 children. During the service, Martin spoke about his family and children in an emotional and noble way. His words showed admirable resilience. At the end of his speech, Martin emphasized that he would always remember the happy image of his family, with Shanynthia and the children by his side. This is a precious memory that he will cherish forever. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Chris Watts. Shanann Razuchek and Christopher Watts, both from North Carolina, met in 2012. Shanann was from Aberdeen and Chris was from Spring Lake. They tied the knot on November 3rd, 2012, but not everyone was thrilled about their union. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, didn't attend the wedding, with Cindy later explaining that she didn't get along with Shanann and didn't like how she treated her son. A year after getting married, Shanann and Chris moved to Frederick, Colorado, marking a fresh start in their lives. They were excited to start a family and eventually welcomed 2 daughters, Bella Marie, born on December 17, 2013, and Celeste Catherine, Cece, born on July 17, 2015. Shanann had been diagnosed with lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease, at a young age. Despite the challenges this presented for getting pregnant, Shanann defied the odds and became a mother twice. She was known for her kindness, compassion, and positivity, and was determined to create a happy life for herself and her family. Shanann was a loving and exceptional mother, and her vibrant personality drew people to her. Every morning, she would send her friends heartfelt texts that read, "Good morning, beautiful," making them feel cherished and uplifted. Her daughters, Bella and Cece, were the center of her universe, and she devoted herself to nurturing and supporting them. Shanann was active on social media, sharing videos that offered a glimpse into her daily life and that of her daughters. Her friends and family cherished these videos, which showcased her warm personality. In many of these videos, Shanann expressed her deep admiration for her husband, Chris, portraying him as a loving husband and father. However, those close to the family found Chris difficult to connect with on a deeper level, as he tended to keep to himself. Despite their reservations, Shanann's family and friends accepted Chris because of her deep love for him. However, the couple was struggling financially, and in June 2015, they filed for bankruptcy due to a heavy mortgage, multiple car payments, loans, medical bills, and significant credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, while Shanann worked at a children's hospital call center. However, by 2016, Shanann had changed careers, becoming a consultant for a multi-level marketing company, selling a nutritional supplement administered through a patch. Shanann loved her job, and it showed. As her co-worker Cynthia DeRosette put it, she had a way of making everyone she met feel her positive energy. Despite being happy with her life, Shanann had one wish: to have a baby boy to complete her family with her husband and 2 daughters. In spring 2018, Shanann got an unexpected but wonderful surprise. She was pregnant again. Overjoyed and excited, she wanted to capture her husband Chris's reaction. So she planned to surprise him on May 28th with the news. Further tests confirmed Shanann was having a baby boy. Shanann and Chris chose the name Nico for their new baby. When they told their daughters Bella and Cece they would be big sisters, the girls were happy. In the summer of 2018, when Shanann was pregnant with Nico, she visited her family in North Carolina while Chris stayed behind in Colorado for work. Shanann took her daughters, Bella and Cece, to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie, despite having a strained relationship with them. During the visit, Cindy prepared a snack for Cece without considering Shanann's prior warning about Cece's severe nut allergy. As a result, the snack contained peanuts, which put Cece's life in danger. Shanann was deeply disturbed by this incident, feeling that Cindy had recklessly disregarded her granddaughter's safety. Shanann expressed her outrage and disappointment in a text message to Chris, accusing his mother of intentionally trying to provoke her by putting Cece's life at risk. She urged Chris to confront his father about Cindy's behavior, implying that if Chris didn't take action, it would suggest he was complicit in his mother's harmful actions, and that Shanann's concerns for her children's safety were justified. While Shanann was visiting her family in North Carolina, she noticed a sudden change in Chris's communication style. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, leaving her confused and concerned. When she asked him what was going on, Chris explained that he had taken on more responsibilities at work due to the arrival of new employees, but reassured her that everything was fine. A week later, Chris flew to North Carolina to spend time with Shanann and their two daughters, Bella and Cece. The girls were excited to see their father and ran to hug him as soon as he arrived. Chris was enthusiastic in his greeting, scooping them up in a tight hug. However, his greeting to Shanann was noticeably colder. Instead of a kiss, he simply nodded at her. Shanann felt hurt and surprised by Chris's distant behavior, and she couldn't help but confide in a friend about her growing concerns through a text message. Shanann felt like she was living with a stranger, not the man she married. She was saddened and confused by the change in Chris. When they were in the same room, he refused to talk to her, and instead, they communicated through their phones. Shanann sent a heartbreaking text to her friend, explaining the situation, and even shared a photo of them sitting on separate couches, facing away from each other. Shanann suspected that Chris might be interested in someone else, which shocked her friend. However, her friend disagreed, saying that Chris loved Shanann too much to do that. But Shanann was devastated because Chris had told her that he no longer thought they were compatible. This was a huge surprise to Shanann, who had always believed their love was strong. Chris had confessed to Shanann that he had hoped getting her pregnant would change his feelings, but it didn't. Shanann was devastated to hear this, as she treasured their relationship and thought their love could overcome any obstacle. Desperate to save her family, Shanann proposed that they attend couples counseling to work through their issues. However, Chris refused. Shanann was willing to do whatever it took to rescue their relationship, but she realized Chris was not willing to meet her halfway. Despite her best efforts, Shanann came to understand that Chris was unwilling to compromise on anything. After their return to Colorado from North Carolina, the family settled back into their routine. However, Shanann soon left for another business trip, this time to Arizona. During her trip to Arizona, Shanann's friends noticed a change in her behavior. She seemed confused, distressed, and not her usual cheerful self. One evening, while they were all in their hotel room, Shanann opened up to her friends about her concerns. She told them that Chris had expressed doubts about their relationship and refused to go to couples therapy. On August 11th, while Shanann was still in Arizona, she received a notification on her phone about a restaurant charge on her and Chris's account. The amount of the charge raised her suspicions, and she wondered if Chris was having dinner with someone else. This made her feel uneasy and doubtful. When Shanann returned home from her trip on August 13th, her friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. Their doorbell camera captured Shanann entering her house at around 1:48 a.m. The next morning, Shanann's friends became worried when they didn't receive their usual good morning messages from her. They knew she had an important doctor's appointment at 9:30 a.m. and were concerned that something might be wrong. When Shanann missed a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, her close friend Nicole Atkinson became alarmed. As the day went by with no word from Shanann, Nicole's concern grew. She sensed something was off. Feeling a strong urge to act, Nicole drove to Shannon's house. As she arrived, she felt a knot in her stomach. Shannon's van was parked in the garage, and her daily shoes sat by the front door. Nicole knocked on the front door, hoping Shannon would emerge, explaining that she had overslept after her flight the previous day. But there was no response. One of Shannon's friends contacted her husband Chris, telling him they couldn't reach her. Chris reassured them, thinking Shannon might have taken their daughters to a friend's house. Shannon's friends were puzzled by Chris's response because they had all been in touch with each other, and none of them knew where Shannon was. She had no plans to meet up with any of them. As a result, her friends told Chris they planned to contact the Frederick Police Department to report Shannon and their daughters, Bella and Cece, as missing. However, Chris did not want to involve the police. One of Shannon's friends, Nicole, was so worried that she went ahead and called 911 to report the three missing. After Nicole's call, a police officer from the Frederick Police Department arrived at the Watts home. The officer's body cam footage showed Nicole's distress as she explained what she knew about Shannon and her daughters. When Chris arrived, he approached the officer, but unlike Nicole, he did not appear to be very concerned, despite his wife and daughters being missing. During a search of Shannon and Chris's home, the officer found Shannon's purse, which contained her medication and that of her two daughters. This finding concerned Shannon's friend Nicole, but Chris, her husband, remained unusually calm. The officer also discovered Shannon's wedding pants on the bedside table. Afterwards, the officer and Chris went to a neighbor's house to review the footage from their security camera. The camera captured footage of Chris's driveway and garage, showing him opening the garage door, moving around, and leaving the house at 5:28 a.m. When Chris watched the footage with the police, his behavior changed. He became nervous and fidgety, which didn't go unnoticed by his neighbor, who suggested to the officer that Chris wasn't acting normal. Chris's reluctance to search for his wife and daughters, Bella and Cece, raised concerns among Shannon's friends, who found it incomprehensible that he wasn't worried about their disappearance. As the investigation unfolded, the police canvassed the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shannon or anything unusual. The FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the search the next day, along with the Boulder Police Department's cadaver dogs, which searched the property and inside the house. During the search, an officer handling a cadaver dog commented that the house smelled of cleaning products and seemed unusually clean. The officer's suspicions were raised by a comment, leading them to inspect the cleanliness of the home more closely. The presence of cleaning products hinted that someone might have tried to hide evidence or erase potential clues. While his house was being searched, Chris gave an interview to 2 Denver news stations outside his residence. During the interview, Chris claimed that he and Shannon hadn't argued before she left, but he did mention they had an emotional conversation. Chris appealed to whoever was holding his family, begging for their return and expressing his desire to be reunited with them. He emphasized that his house felt empty without them, but his behavior during the interview raised concerns. Chris appeared cold and unemotional, which surprised those who knew him. Shannon's friends, who watched the interview, were disgusted by Chris's nonchalant demeanor, finding it strange and contradictory to his plea for his family's return. On August 14th, Special Agent Coda conducted an interview with Chris. During the conversation, Chris suggested that Shannon might have taken the girls to a friend's house to unwind. Meanwhile, the police station received a flood of tips about possible sightings of Shannon and the girls. The department received various photos, which Chris was asked to review to see if he could identify his missing wife and daughters. However, he was unable to provide any identifications. Agent Coda also asked Chris about his marriage to Shannon during the interview. Chris claimed that he had never been unfaithful to Shannon, and, to the best of his knowledge, she had never been unfaithful to him either. He explained that they were the type of couple who would confide in each other if they ever felt tempted to stray. One notable aspect of Chris's behavior during the interview caught Agent Coder's attention. Chris frequently made hand movements towards his neck. Agent Coder's intuition was growing stronger, suggesting the movements might be pointing to a more sinister truth. During the interview, Agent Coder stepped out briefly to share his concerns with the other officers, suspecting Chris might have strangled Shanann. As the hours ticked by with no sign of Shanann and her daughters, the loved one's anxiety turned to desperation. Despite their fears for Shanann's safety, they held on to the glimmer of hope that Bella and Cece might still be alive. The lack of updates from the authorities only added to their distress. After a 3-hour interrogation, Chris was released from the police department, but the police instructed him to return the next day, August 15th, for a polygraph test. Here's what happened. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test to help with the investigation into his family's disappearance. On August 15th, Chris picked up his father from the airport and went to the Frederick Police Department, where Tammy Lee from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation administered the test. During the test, Chris denied any involvement in his family's disappearance and claimed not to know where his wife Shanann was. However, the results of the test were not in Chris's favor. This led the detectives to strongly suspect that Chris was responsible for the deaths of his wife and daughters. Tammy Lee, a highly skilled polygrapher, confronted Chris about the test results. Chris admitted that he had caused Shanann emotional pain, but denied physically harming her. He also confessed to having an affair with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger, which he deeply regretted. Despite his confessions, Chris still denied any involvement in his family's disappearance. At one point, he asked to have his father, Ronnie, present during the interview. The officers were hesitant, worried that this might lead Chris to ask for a lawyer. Chris Watt's father was allowed to accompany him in the interrogation room, a risky move that detectives hoped would prompt Chris to confess. And it worked. Chris admitted to killing Shanann, but claimed he did so because she had harmed their daughters, Bella and Cece. However, this excuse was immediately met with skepticism by Shannann's friends, who knew she would never hurt her children. In fact, Shanann was eagerly awaiting the birth of her third child, a son named Nico. During the interrogation, Chris disclosed the location of Shannann's body, which he had buried in a shallow grave at one of his work sites. He also revealed that he had disposed of his daughters' bodies in oil tanks. Despite this, Chris continued to deny any involvement in their deaths. Even after being arrested and taken into custody, the detectives never believed Shanann was responsible for harming her daughters. In the end, Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the sentencing hearing for Chris, the judge expressed outrage over the brutal crime Chris had committed, calling it the most inhumane and vicious one he had seen in his entire career of handling thousands of cases. Years later, Chris confessed to murdering his wife Shanann in their bed. According to Chris, he strangled her after she discovered his infidelity and threatened to take their daughters away. Chris then put Shannann's body in his truck and drove to his work site with their 2 daughters. Tragically, Chris admitted to killing his daughters one by one at the site, with one daughter forced to witness the murder of her sister before meeting the same fate. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vashti Seacat. Brad Seacat was born on March 3, 1976, in Kingman, Kansas, to Janet Seacat and her husband, whose identity and background remain undisclosed due to a previous marriage. Janet had a son, Robert, from a prior marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Seacat family has a history of good law enforcement, leading to a strict and disciplined home environment. Although details about Brad's childhood are scarce, it is known that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was physically strong and athletic, which led him to participate in high school wrestling and bodybuilding. His efforts paid off as he excelled in inter-school tournaments, often taking first place and gaining recognition as a star wrestler and prominent figure in his school. At 16, Brad met Vashti Seacat at a major wrestling competition at the Kansas City Coliseum. Vashti was born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Sur County, to Julie Hosteler and Clinton Forrest. She was the third of 4 children, with an older brother, Rich, and sister, Catherine, and a younger sister, Tyler. Vashti was a social person with many friends, but she struggled with feelings of inadequacy. However, this didn't hold her back from becoming a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team. She enjoyed watching the team win and attended every match, including the one where she met Brad. Brad was immediately smitten with Vashti and asked her out. Impressed by his confidence, she accepted, and they felt an instant connection at their first meeting. From that moment on, they were inseparable. After high school, Vashti attended a university, while he followed in his family's footsteps by enrolling in the police academy. As a result, they spent less time together, which caused Brad was starting to exhibit controlling and possessive behavior. Over time, Brad's growing jealousy became unbearable for Vashti, and she eventually ended the relationship. Although the breakup was not dramatic or traumatic, it marked the end of their romance. After graduating from the police academy, Brad joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, a short distance from Kingman. Despite his professional accomplishments, he couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness. He still had strong feelings for Vashti, and his love for her lingered deep within him. Brad didn't abandon his dream of reuniting with Vashti, and as soon as the chance presented itself, he visited her. His words struck a chord with Vashti, who sensed his sincerity, possibly due to his devotion to faith or genuine affection. This led her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brad hastily approached Vashti's family to express his true intentions and request her hand in marriage. The Seacat family was thrilled to hear the news, convinced that their marriage would be a successful one. The wedding took place in 2004, after which Brad and Vashti settled in a neighborhood in Kingman. As they began building their new life, they befriended Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to backyard barbecues. Brad's unpleasant behavior causing problems due to his controlling personality. However, when Vashti became pregnant, their issues appeared to fade away. In 2006, they welcomed their first son, Brandon, and 2 years later, their second son, Bronson. Although Brad was a loving father, he sometimes had a rough way of interacting with the children, especially during playtime. He treated the children like adults and occasionally showed a more aggressive side. Brad's behavior was concerning. He once beat a prisoner by hitting his head against a concrete wall, causing a fractured skull and brain damage. The prisoner later died from his injuries. Brad was sued for using excessive force, but his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve, supported him, and the charges were eventually dropped. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing Brad of any wrongdoing. Brad showed no remorse for his actions and even admitted to his colleagues that he liked to use violence, especially against individuals he considered bad people. On a separate occasion, Brad and another officer restrained a defendant who became unruly and resisted being removed from the courtroom for contempt of the judge. This incident earned them recognition, and the police chief awarded both officers bronze medals for their actions. On the other hand, Vashti wants to pursue her career despite her love for her children. She searched for a job and succeeded with her efforts. She became the new human resources director at Vito Communications Company. However, Brad seemed unhappy about her new role. He wants Vashti to focus only on family work and her children's education. As a result, he started complaining about Vashti spending too much time at the office. The number of arguments between Vashti and Brad increased significantly. Despite her best efforts to repair their marriage for the sake of their children, Vashti feels her efforts are in vain. She had a feeling that their situation would eventually end in disaster. To resolve the conflict, Vashti and Brad began attending sessions with social worker Connie Sodman. During her first sessions, Vashti expressed feelings of extreme loneliness and isolation, suggesting that couples therapy sessions might be their last hope to save their marriage. Every time Vashti mentioned the possibility of divorce, Brad became angry. For weeks, he repeatedly threatened to kill her if she left him, boasting that he could take her life without consequences because he was a police officer. He claimed he could make her murder look like a suicide, and even mentioned burning down their house to destroy the evidence. After the argument, Brad threatened her, saying that if Vashti pursued a divorce, he would prevent her from seeing their children, even taking them out of the country if necessary. At the same time, Brad left his police job and began working as a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashti continued to attend therapy sessions and made positive changes in her life, such as exercising regularly and eating healthier. A few months later, Vashti's social life began to flourish. She makes new connections at work and meets someone she is attracted to. However, she confided in her sister about her new relationship out of fear that Brad might find out and take revenge. Vashti openly shared with her colleagues about the various threats she received from her husband. Unbeknownst to her, Brad discovered her personal diary and brought it to his office, where he scanned and printed out many pages. He then spends his days researching topics including suicide, fire injuries, and the difference between murder and suicide. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti had her final counseling session with Connie to prepare for her divorce from Brad. Together, they created a safety plan for Vashti and their children. When Brad received his divorce papers on April 29th, he overreacted. After discovering the papers, Brad finds a projector in the pantry and uses it to enlarge a handwritten note from Vashti's diary. At the same time, he also wrote a farewell message to his children. What's amazing is that he also printed out documents on how to disguise a murder as a suicide. Additionally, Brad asked the maintenance staff how to properly destroy computer hard drives, and he used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained images that were unfavorable to him. Then he threw the rest in the trash. Later that day, Brad bought gas at a convenience store and put it in his truck. That evening, he asked Vashti if he could spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children and promised to leave the next morning. However, he also tries to persuade Vashti to reconsider the divorce and becomes increasingly threatening when she refuses to change her mind. Vashti and Brad had a disagreement that evening, which resulted in Vashti going to bed exhausted around 3:15 a.m. Meanwhile, Brad entered the bedroom with a gun and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake and watching TV thought she heard gunshots but felt it wasn't concerning enough. Brad then staged his suicide by placing the gun next to Vashti's body. He poured gasoline into the hallway and upstairs bedroom and took Vashti's phone to call himself, creating an alibi. After getting his children, Brendan and Bronson, to a safe location, Brad started a fire. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the main room and igniting the remaining cartridges in the gun. At 3:45 a.m., neighbors were startled awake by the fire. Shortly thereafter, at around 7 a.m., Brad called 911, reporting that his wife had taken her own life. When emergency responders arrived, the first floor of the house was on fire and Brad was waiting in the car with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was still in the house, and Brad said that only his wife was there. He fabricated a story that Vashti had shot herself out of depression, and before doing that, she asked him to take the children to a safe place. Brad claimed he tried to save Vashti but was unable to do so because of the intense smoke and fire. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze, they discovered Vashti's body on the bed in the master bedroom. An important detail attracted the attention of investigators. A .44 caliber revolver was found below Vashti's body, the barrel pointed toward her feet, and a 5-gallon gasoline barrel lay middle of the bed. 2 days later, investigators found Vashti's diary in her car, which contained a handwritten note and a suicide note. Forensic examination revealed that Vashti died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head and also suffered gunshot wounds to the torso and thighs. However, blood and lung tests showed no signs of smoke or carbon monoxide inhalation, which is typically present in the body of a person killed in a fire. The extent of the burns on Vashti's body made it impossible to determine whether her death was a murder or suicide. Police discovered some inconsistencies in Brad's story. It is worth noting that there was no dirt, blood, or wound on his body. Additionally, the position of the gun with the barrel pointing downward raises suspicions that this was not a suicide. Special Agent David Fetty of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation questioned how the gun came to be under the body. He pointed out that if Vashti shot herself while lying down, the gun would fall to the floor. If she sat up, the gun would still be on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet does not support the theory that Vashti shot himself behind the right ear. David decides to investigate further when some details don't seem to add up. Police found documents explaining how to make a murder look like a suicide. While analyzing Vashti's diary entry, they noticed her handwriting did not match her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarr concluded that the note had been tampered with. Witnesses also reported seeing Brad destroy a computer hard drive the day before. A neighbor who heard the fatal gunshot testified that the incident occurred at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Brad called 911. This information confirms David's suspicions that something is wrong. Police arrested Brad on May 13, 2011 and charged him with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 other counts related to putting his sons, Brendan and Bronson, in danger. During interrogation, Brad claimed that Vashti felt insecure and depressed because of their troubled marriage and his threats to take the children away. Brad also claimed that after filing for divorce, Vashti was overcome with depression and remorse, so she set a fire and shot herself. However, the police did not believe his story. The trial began on June 10, 2013. Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley shared her account of the events with the jury, emphasizing that no one was more aware than the police of the devastation of fire and its destructive ability to erase evidence. Regarding the projector, the defendant claimed that he only used this device for practical training to guide students. A forensic examiner testified about a forged letter and the destruction of a hard drive. The defendant claimed that he destroyed the hard drive to protect personal information, not to hide anything. The defendant's attorney, Roger Falk, argued that Vashti had suffered from depression since high school, a condition that had worsened after taking some kind of sedative. Brad's brother testified in court, corroborating his brother's account that Vashti had been depressed and sad for weeks before her death. In contrast, therapist Can reported that although Vashti was initially depressed due to marital circumstances, it was not a clinical mental health problem. The therapist said Vashti has been very worried about her future lately. Vashti's brother also recounting the emotional turmoil Vashti's children had endured as a result of their parents' circumstances. The prosecution portrayed Brad as a manipulative person who used his police powers to distort the truth. Yet the defense repeatedly argued that Vashti's death was a suicide and pointed out that even the medical examiner could not determine the cause of her death. Brad testified in his own defense, describing himself as a loving husband and devoted father who was saddened by his wife's desire for a divorce. Kingman County Judge Larry Solomon was accused by Brad that the judge had an incentive to rule against him to win a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. However, the jury ultimately found Brad guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Solomon sentenced Brad to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and an additional 6 years for other crimes. Brad will not be eligible for parole until he has served more than 31 years. In handing down the sentence, the judge took into account Brad's not guilty plea, his dishonest attempt to avoid responsibility, and his lack of remorse. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Smith family. George Smith was born and raised in Greenwich, Connecticut. He came from a close-knit, caring family, an environment that nurtured his intelligence. His father, George Smith Sr., owned the liquor store in the town, which was not just a job, but a passion that brought him joy. George Smith pursued higher education in business at Babson College in Massachusetts and graduated in 2000. After completing his studies, he worked in Boston as a data mining analyst for several years. However, he realized that his true passion was helping his family in the business. In 2005, George made the conscious decision to return home to learn the basics of business from his family's store. His goal was to one day take over the business, allowing his parents to retire and enjoy the fruits of their labor. In 2002, at a reunion with old friends, George Smith met Jennifer. She, a Connecticut native who had just found work as an elementary school teacher, would later become his life partner. George was immediately attracted to her beautiful appearance, open personality, and strong ambition, and they quickly fell deeply in love. George's parents also welcomed Jennifer with open arms. 3 years later, in 2005, when George was 26, they decided to tie the knot and start a new life together. Their picturesque wedding ceremony was held right on the beach at the Castle Hill Inn, Newport, Rhode Island. Nai sao bui lu, cap doi moi koi de tan hong tuan trang mat xa hoa kio de 12 gay tren du Thuyen Royal Caribbean. Their journey began in Barcelona on June 29, with stops in France's Côte d'Azur and along Italy's coast. On board, George and Jennifer befriended another couple and a young man named Josh Askin from California. Josh Askin, a 20 years old with a great sense of humor, quickly became friends with George. The group had a great time together. On July 1st, when the ship docked off the Italian coast, they decided to spend the day on land. July 4th, they explored the island, wandering through the narrow streets of the old town, swimming in the crystal-clear Aegean Sea, and sampling local cuisine in quaint taverns. They were carefree and happy, enjoying each other's company and the island's beauty. The group left Mykonos with unforgettable memories and planned to continue the fun on the ship's deck that evening. After a romantic dinner, George and Jennifer rejoined their friends on the ship. The group decided to get together and enjoy a good time together, laugh and create memories of their vacation. The evening was filled with laughter and excitement. After enjoying appetizers and drinks, the newlyweds, accompanied by Josh Askin, headed to the ship Ciaschino to continue the fun. George and Josh Askin spent their evening enjoying a game of craps, while Jennifer had fun playing poker at a nearby table. As the night came to a close, the newlyweds had lost a substantial amount of money, but they joked about it lightheartedly, unbothered by their losses. After the Ciaschino closed, they decided to keep the party going. Later, around 2:30 a.m. on June 5, 2005, security cameras on the Greek island of Mykonos caught footage of George leaving the Ciaschino, but it remains unclear whether he returned to his cabin afterwards. George Smith, a 26-year-old newlywed, is on his honeymoon with his wife Jennifer. They is having a fantastic time together, soaking up the lively atmosphere and entertainment on board. However, their enjoyable evening suddenly takes a mysterious turn. Upon investigating the incident, the ship's captain searched George's cabin, finding unusual footprints under the window, as well as evidence of a disturbance on deck. George was missing, and footprints at the scene suggested there may have been a struggle, raising doubts about George's safety. The sudden disappearance of the newlywed couple spread quickly, causing passengers on the ship to become worried and scared. The crew cordoned off Deck 7 and restricted access to cabins while they searched for George and Jennifer. After finding blood, it was presumed that they had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The senior officer took charge of the investigation and went to their stateroom to gather more information. Based on the evidence, it was suspected that George might have fallen overboard. Meanwhile, the search for they continued on the other side of the ship. By 10 a.m., Jennifer was found in a ship spa, where she was receiving a pre-booked massage. She looked surprised and worried, claiming she had no idea where her husband was and hadn't seen him since the previous night. According to Jennifer, she woke up and found George not there, but she thought he was with friends or in another cabin. She then went to her spa appointment without giving his absence a second thought. At noon, Turkish authorities boarded the ship to investigate the disappearance of George. The captain reassured passengers that the investigation was necessary to understand what happened and hoped it would end quickly. The police began by questioning George's wife, Jennifer, who was visibly agitated and seemed to have limited information about her husband's disappearance. Jennifer told the police that she had last seen George the previous night and that Royal Caribbean staff had informed her that he may have fallen overboard. The discovery of blood on the boat's awning suggests that something terrible has happened to George. As a result, Jennifer became the main suspect due to her agitated state and apparent lack of knowledge about her husband's disappearance. The investigators then examined cabin 962, which was found to be in disarray, suggesting a possible struggle. In the bathroom, they discovered small drops of blood on the carpet and towel, as well as fingerprints on the balcony railing. Furthermore, 2 small blood stains, each approximately 2 centimeters long, were found on the bedding. The blood samples were later identified as belonging to George. George's disappearance from the cabin remains a mystery, and all evidence points to the fact that he experienced trauma before he disappeared. A chair on the balcony, positioned to allow someone to sit next to the railing, caught the investigators' attention. Marks on the railing suggested someone had indeed sat there, sparking suspicion that George might have fallen. However, the high railing and bloodstains on the boat's awning and inside the cabin hinted at a more sinister scenario: murder. Investigators have been trying to determine who George was with that night and what may have led to his disappearance. The inquiry was in its early stages, but it was already clear that the case was complex and fraught with mysteries. The Turkish authorities boarded the ship to investigate George Smith's disappearance. They began by questioning the group of friends with whom the newlyweds had spent the previous night. As the investigation remained shrouded in mystery, every detail was crucial. They reported that George and Jennifer had consumed excessive alcohol, leading to George's intoxication. They claimed to have helped him back to the cabin, put him to bed, and removed his shoes before leaving him alone. However, they were unable to account for Jennifer's whereabouts and assumed she had returned to the cabin later. Notably, Josh Askin's testimony contained inconsistencies. He alleged that Jennifer had left the group to go with a casino employee named Lloyd, contradicting the assumption that she had returned to the cabin. Josh Askin and Jennifer have deep feelings for each other, and they have both openly expressed their feelings for George. However, when reviewing the security footage, the story is different. At 3:30 a.m., the footage showed Jennifer leaving with new friends, while George stayed behind. Furthermore, data from Lloyd's keycard indicated that he returned to his cabin at 3:25 a.m., a fact confirmed by his girlfriend. This new information raised more questions and led investigators to suspect that Josh Askin may have been hiding some crucial details. As the investigation continues, each new revelation added more mystery to the story. On a different part of the ship, a young man named Greg Rosenberg was enjoying a family cruise with friends, including his cousin Zach Rosenberg and close friend Rostislav Kaufman. The 3 men, who all held American passports despite their Russian heritage, lived in New York City. Greg Rosenberg and Jennifer had started their evening at the casino, trying their luck at poker together. After the casino closed at 2:30 a.m., they joined their friends and decided to continue the party. The group headed to the ship's disco, where they danced and drank together, enjoying each other's company. Lloyd Bota, the casino manager, was also seen having a good time with the young men. The witnesses' accounts of the nighttime activities start to conflict with one another as the group members disperse to their cabins. It was already late, and they were visibly intoxicated. According to the ship's rules, passengers who were loud and behaved inappropriately would have their drink delivery blocked. When the staff refused to serve the drunk visitors, they remembered they had a bottle of absinthe they had bought on the island of Mykonos. However, the crew had forbidden passengers from consuming their own alcohol on board. Josh Askin returned to his cabin to retrieve a special bottle of wormwood wine that he said he had purchased earlier. It was later discovered that this absinthe was exceptionally strong, with an alcohol concentration of over 70%, making it one of the strongest drinks available. George decided to help his friend by hiding the bottle of absinthe in his shorts. However, an observant janitor noticed something unusual. A group of young men, including Greg, Zach, Rostislav, Josh Askin, and George, were drinking from the bottle. This incident was added to the investigation. That evening, not only the men were intoxicated. Jennifer, at first very alert and calm, then showed signs of intoxication. She began to stagger and at one point, leaned on Lloyd, the casino manager. Some thought she was trying to regain her balance, while others interpreted it as flirting. What happened next between Jennifer and George remains unclear. According to eyewitness accounts, they got into an argument, but it's unknown if they were joking or serious. At some point, Jennifer hit George, and it's unclear if it was playful or out of anger. Jennifer left the disco around 3:30 a.m., visibly intoxicated and stumbling. George stayed behind with his new friends. The staff's testimony was crucial in uncovering what happened next. Jennifer's unsteady walk caught the attention of the janitor, who had seen her and her friends drinking earlier. He helped her to the elevator and watched her turn right when she reached her deck. However, this is where the story takes a confusing turn. Her stateroom was on the left, but she headed in the opposite direction. Jennifer was found asleep in a hallway far from her room. 2 guards and a female duty officer used a wheelchair to return her to her quarters. When they arrived, the clock read 4:52 a.m. But her husband George was not there. The curtains on the balcony doors were closed tightly and remained still despite the breeze, raising questions about whether George had gone out to the balcony on his own after his friends left him in bed. Deputy Chief of Police Chit Hyman and his wife were in a neighboring cabin. They were awakened at 4 a.m. by a noise and heard loud sounds coming from George's stateroom, number 9062. Chit Hyman reported the noise to guest services and also yelled through the wall to try to quiet the disturbance. The noise stopped briefly, but then loud talking resumed for about 3 minutes. An argument on the balcony followed, during which someone said, "Good night," repeatedly, as if trying to make people leave. After that, there were sounds of furniture being moved, and finally a loud thud, like something had fallen. Chit Hyman decided to investigate a disturbance and opened the door to find 3 unidentified men. Other passengers also reported hearing a loud noise that sounded like a body hitting the boat's canopy, followed by a woman's scream. However, none of the eyewitnesses had conclusive evidence that a woman was inside the cabin at the time. According to witnesses, 4 young men entered the cabin, but only 3 of them were visible when they exited. This raised the question of whether one of them might have stayed inside to search for money from the newlywed couple, who had recently won a significant amount at the casino. The theory of a failed robbery attempt seems plausible, but there are inconsistencies in the alibis of the 3 boys, Greg, Zach, and Rostislav. They claim to have been in another stateroom just minutes after Hyman saw the 3 unknown men. The key card records for George's stateroom confirm that they entered it at 4:05 a.m., but there is no record of them entering the cabin again. This has led to several theories about what might have happened to George Smith. Another theory suggests that George and Jennifer's drunkenness was not simply due to excessive alcohol consumption. Although they appeared relatively sober when they left the casino at 2:30 a.m., they were unable to return to their cabin on their own by 3:30 a.m., implying possible exposure to illicit substances. This idea is supported by the testimony of other casino visitors, who reported that George and Jennifer openly discussed having large sums of money, possibly from wedding gifts or casino winnings. Estimates of their wealth varied, but all witnesses agreed it was in the tens of thousands of dollars. The fact that George wore an expensive Breitling watch and Jennifer owned a valuable engagement ring further suggested they were wealthy. It's possible that their quarters were targeted by thieves searching for the money they had been boasting about. Two possible explanations have been proposed for the disappearance of George. The first theory suggests that the kidnapper may have injured George while trying to remove his valuable watch, resulting in bloodstains on the sheet. The second theory focuses on the effects of alcohol and hallucinogens. After discovering that the passengers had been drinking and finding footprints on the balcony, the captain suspected that an accidental fall overboard might have occurred during a scuffle. Particular attention has been paid to hallucinations caused by drinking wormwood wine, a beverage containing the active ingredient thujone. However, toxicology experts note that the concentration of thujone plays a crucial role in determining its effects. Importantly, absinthe sold in European countries today is strictly regulated, and the thujone concentration is limited to such a low level that it is incapable of causing hallucinations. The fact that the George actually purchased the wormwood wine in Europe makes it unlikely that it caused the hallucinations, as experts claim that the amount of alcohol required to produce such hallucinations would have to be extremely large. In reality, only black market absinthe with a much higher concentration could potentially cause hallucinations. In the investigation into George Smith's disappearance, the FBI conducted polygraph interviews with Jennifer and Lloyd Bota, and who both passed. However, Joshua Skin failed the polygraph, which may suggest that he is hiding something about George's disappearance. The investigation into George's mysterious death uncovered a significant piece of evidence, a videotape featuring 3 individuals, including Russians, making jokes about an incident. The FBI agents reviewed this tape, and a particular comment made by one of the men, "We gave him a lesson in paragliding without a parachute," suggests a potential connection to George's case. During the investigation in 2009, FBI agents interviewed Greg, Zach, Rostislav, and Joshua Skin as witnesses. However, Zach Rosenberg and Joshua Skin declined to provide a direct answer. Their answers remained vague, implying that they did not want to share full details of what happened. Another crucial witness was Greg Rosenberg, who was with the group of men entertaining on the night of the incident. He claimed they ordered food to their cabin that evening, providing a possible alibi for the Russian men. Nevertheless, inconsistencies were found in this statement. However, this information is incorrect. According to the ship's service records, their cabin was blocked from service that day. Staff were also specifically instructed not to serve the group that evening. Greg could not confidently say which passenger in the cabin had ordered food. Witnesses offered differing opinions on the nature of George and Jennifer's relationship, citing various observations and recollections. Greg believed it was challenging to gauge the quality of their relationship due to the group's heavy drinking. According to him, everyone in the group was extremely intoxicated, making it hard to determine the specifics of their interactions. There was a discrepancy in testimony as to whether Greg left the cabin immediately after ordering food. Joshua Skin provided information that Greg left the cabin after ordering food. However, Greg denied this statement, saying that he never left. This contradiction complicated the investigation, requiring further investigation to establish the facts. In December 2019, Greg Rosenberg was murdered, and the case remains unsolved. Investigators are exploring a potential connection between his death and that of George Smith. The mysterious circumstances surrounding George Smith's appearance have raised significant questions about his background and family. As details emerged, the situation grew increasingly complicated, with the actions of his relatives following the tragedy drawing scrutiny from both the public and law enforcement. The George family persisted in seeking answers and justice regarding George's disappearance. The case was moved from the FBI's Connecticut office to the New York office. The family offered a $100,000 reward for any information that could help identify and bring to justice those responsible for the crime. They also called for a boycott of the shipping company, which they believed was trying to cover up the incident to protect its profits. The incident also strained the relationship between George's parents and his young wife, Jennifer. Her behavior was closely scrutinized and many found her composure suspicious. She said she was acting on the orders of FBI agents, doing exactly as they told her. However, her hesitation to provide more information sparked suspicion. The George family, who were seeking truth and justice, became disheartened when Jennifer agreed to a $1 million settlement offer from the judgment company. This move appeared to them as a betrayal. They felt the Turkish authorities' investigation lacked transparency, and Jennifer seemed too hasty in accepting the offer, fueling their suspicions that she was concealing information and wasn't invested in uncovering the truth. In contrast, Jennifer says she has very few memories of what happened after 2:30 a.m. that night, unaware that the liner's staff had even found her in the corridor and escorted her back to her cabin. This satisfied with the Turkish investigation. The George family to take matters into their own hands by engaging independent forensic scientist Henry Lee to assist them. Henry Lee conducted a series of studies in the cabin and on the balcony that were not included in the official investigation. These studies could have revealed crucial information about the events surrounding George's death and potentially confirmed one of their main theories: murder or accident. According to Henry Lee, the height of the balcony makes it unclear whether George's fall was an accident or not. It is possible that a third party pushed him or that he was in a state of insanity and climbed onto a chair before falling. Henry Lee had planned to conduct an experiment to simulate a fall from the balcony, but the cruise line owner refused to allow it. George's relatives believe that this decision was made to obstruct their efforts to uncover the truth. Henry Lee also conducted investigations in the cabin, on the balcony, and on the boat, but the results of these investigations were not made public. Meanwhile, the FBI launched its own investigation, but many of its findings and discoveries were kept secret. The FBI's investigation into George Smith's disappearance focused on 4 young men who spent the night with him, as well as 3 Russians: Greg, Zach Rosenberg, and Rostislav Kaufman. However, their testimonies were inconsistent with those of other witnesses, adding to the mystery and confusion surrounding the case. Initially, Jennifer was a suspect, but she was eventually cleared of suspicion. The family then increased the amount of their lawsuit against the company and used the payout to secure the release of the investigation's results, including witness statements and other relevant information. Jennifer was left to cherish the memories of George and dedicated herself to charitable work in his honor. She later remarried, continuing to strive to make a positive impact in his memory. The FBI launched an extensive investigation into George Smith's disappearance, but it was ultimately unable to uncover the truth about his fate or recover his body. Due to lack of evidence, the case was eventually closed, and his death was officially classified as an accident. George's family continues to seek answers about the circumstances surrounding his death, and not being able to visit his grave and pay their respects is the greatest suffering for them. They remain hopeful that the truth will eventually come to light, bringing closure to the case. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Plass. Amanda Plass was born on December 11, 1990. She grew up in Choppy, Massachusetts, with her sister Emily and brother Nicholas. Amanda's mother, Michelle Mayes, described her daughter as a hippie and often joked that she was born in the wrong era. In 2011, Amanda worked as a waitress at a Friendly's in Choppy and was dating a 27-year-old carpenter named Seth Green. On August 26, 2011, Seth called 911 to report that he had found Amanda unconscious in the kitchen of her third-floor apartment. During the call, Seth tearfully told the operator that when he arrived, Amanda was lying on the floor, unresponsive, with multiple stab wounds to her body. He did not know how to help and requested the police and an ambulance. When paramedics arrived, they confirmed that Amanda had died from multiple stab wounds, including to her chest, throat, and abdomen. Police cordoned off the home where the crime took place. When they arrived, they found Seth on the porch, crying and unable to calm down. Detectives carefully searched Amanda's apartment. Whoever the perpetrator was, they had escaped but left behind some evidence. The first thing that caught the detectives' attention was the large amount of blood in the kitchen, indicating that the attack had been carried out with a knife. Police also found Nike shoe prints on the floor and handprints on the broken glass window. The motive for this brutal murder remains a mystery. Based on the condition and number of Amanda's injuries, detectives suspect that she may have known her attacker and that the motive was a personal vendetta. Therefore, the first suspect was Amanda's boyfriend, Seth Green. Police took Seth Green in for questioning. It was no surprise that he was the first suspect, given his close relationship with the victim, his blood-stained clothing, and his role in calling 911. The fact that he and Amanda had been dating for less than 2 weeks before her death, and that her family barely knew him, raised suspicions. Seth was 7 years older than Amanda and likely had different views on some issues. But did that lead to an argument that resulted in the brutal crime? This led investigators to suspect that Seth could be the killer, even though he claimed Amanda was dead before he arrived at her apartment. They determined that about 2 hours had passed between Amanda's death and Seth calling 911. That was enough time to cover up evidence and remove the weapon. So the first question detectives had to answer was whether Seth Green had anything to do with Amanda's death. When Seth showed up at the police station, he looked like he had just been through something terrible. He was mourning the death of his girlfriend. Investigators wanted to know if his feelings were genuine or if he was just trying to deflect suspicion from himself. During questioning, Seth said he had been working all day. He had planned to take Amanda to the restaurant where she worked, but couldn't because of his busy schedule. Seth said he didn't know Amanda well because they weren't in a long-term relationship, but he loved her and had no reason to hurt her. Seth worked as a carpenter at a construction site. Investigators began asking him about his tools, implying that he may have used one of them to commit the crime. Seth often used a tool belt at work, which contained a variety of carpentry tools, including a knife. However, he claimed that he always put the tool belt back after work, and that day was no exception. Seth finished the job, changed his clothes and tools, and then went to see Amanda. He understood why he was the most suspected, but he still insisted that he had nothing to do with his girlfriend's death. The police eventually confirmed Seth's alibi. He even passed a lie detector test. When he arrived at the scene, he was wearing construction shoes, which clearly did not match the Nike shoe prints at the scene. In addition, his shoe size was much larger, and the fingerprints on the glasses did not belong to him. With these facts, the police eliminated him as a suspect. Because Amanda tried to resist, she inflicted injuries on the perpetrator. The perpetrator likely suffered scratches on his body in the first weeks after the crime, as a piece of skin belonging to the perpetrator was found under Amanda's fingernails, an important piece of evidence that the police had hoped for. However, when they tested the DNA sample, they found no match in the database. The motive for the crime remains unclear, as many of the items in Amanda's room were still intact. With no signs of forced entry, the police have two theories as to how the criminals entered the house. Amanda may have known them and let them in, or she may have forgotten to lock the door. Investigators interviewed Amanda's co-workers and friends and discovered that the case may have involved a love triangle. Before dating Seth, Amanda had been in a relationship with someone else, and the breakup was not smooth because Amanda initiated it. After a while, she started dating Seth, and Amanda's ex-boyfriend did not seem to be happy with this. Jealousy sometimes leads people to act rashly with serious consequences. Investigators checked the information but found this theory to be unlikely. Amanda's ex-boyfriend provided his DNA and fingerprints, neither of which matched the traces found on her body or at the scene. Furthermore, he had a convincing alibi. Police investigated other leads but failed to find a solution to Amanda's death, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Amanda's family was determined to find justice, so they distributed flyers and held community events in the hope that someone would come forward with vital information. Amanda's mother, Michelle, said her daughter was not perfect, but she did not understand why Amanda died and why no one had reported any useful information to the police. Amanda's family faced another emotional challenge. They discovered that several police officers had taken photos of Amanda's body on their phones and shared them with others, including civilians. According to an internal report, Sergeant Keith Lame, a senior officer who was in charge of monitoring the scene at 73 School Street, where Amanda was stabbed to death on August 26, 2011, was one of the photographers. He sent the photos from his cell phone to another sergeant, who then forwarded them to a patrol officer. One officer shared the photo with civilians, including a coach at a youth soccer game. Records show that Keith used his cell phone to take the photo. Keith then forwarded the photo to Sergeant Jeffrey Godair. Sergeant Jeffrey emailed the photo to Patrolman Chad Levesque. Patrolman Chad shared the photo of Amanda, lying on the kitchen floor, with other soccer coaches. As he did so, Chad said, "This is something I have to deal with at work." The photo was shown to at least 3 coaches at a youth soccer game in Agawam the day after the murder, according to Captain William Jebb, the internal affairs officer who wrote the report. At that time, Patrolman Terry Deck, who was assigned to record all traffic in the apartment for state police, took a photo of Amanda's body and emailed it separately to 6 Chicopee police officers. The investigation found that all 6 officers deleted the emails. None of them were punished for wrongdoing, and their names were not listed on criminal records. The others were punished for incompetence and failure to meet work standards. Terry and Keith, who took the photos, received letters of reprimand. Jeffrey and Chad were docked wages. Nearly 2 years after the murder, there was no sign that the investigation was any closer to finding the culprit. So investigators decided to review all the relevant evidence, hoping to find some missing information. After reviewing the evidence and items in Amanda's bedroom, they discovered a dry erase board with a suspicious message. The message read, "Dennis was here on November 8th. Interestingly, November 8th was only about 2 weeks before Amanda's body was discovered. Investigators began to wonder about the man named Dennis and his role in the case. They began to investigate the relationship between Dennis and Amanda by examining phone records and social media posts. While investigating Amanda's apartment, police discovered that her ex-boyfriend had given them a crucial clue. He said that Amanda's apartment had been broken into several times during her absence. In particular, Amanda told him that she suspected a young Puerto Rican man whose name began with the letter D. However, she did not want to report the incident to the police and wanted to resolve the situation herself by talking to the man. Amanda tried to talk to the man about the break-in, but he would not listen. Amanda then informed him that a neighbor had witnessed him at her apartment. She also begged him to return items that were missing from her home. However, the man became angry and left. The main goal of the investigators was to identify Dennis and determine whether he was involved in Amanda's death. They discovered that a man named Dennis Rosa Roman lived near where Amanda died. A search of Dennis's records revealed that he had been convicted of burglary and breaking and entering. However, no fingerprints were found that matched the ones found at Amanda's home. Police tracked Dennis to Westfield, Massachusetts, and asked him to come to the police station to talk, but he refused. During the brief encounter, Dennis appeared very nervous. Surprisingly, Dennis turned himself into the police station in November 2013 at the age of 22. Police questioned Dennis about his connection to Amanda. Although Dennis admitted to knowing Amanda from Choppy, he said he had not seen her in several years. This made sense since Amanda had been dead for some time. Investigators then asked him if he had ever been to Amanda's apartment. He replied that he had never been there and did not really know her well. He only admitted that he sometimes sold Amanda marijuana and had had a few brief interactions with her. During questioning, Dennis agreed to provide an oral DNA sample and provided his shoe size. The results showed that his shoe size matched the shoes found at the crime scene. Officers also noted that Dennis was wearing a pair of Nike Air Max shoes, the same type as the shoes found at the scene but with a different sole pattern. After providing his DNA, Dennis refused to answer further questions and promised to return to the police station in a few days to continue the conversation. Because there was insufficient evidence to arrest him, officers were forced to release him. This raised concerns that he might be attempting to flee, causing the investigation to stall. Further investigation revealed that Amanda had been in telephone contact with Dennis on July 28, 2011. She made 4 calls and received 5 calls from him. At the same time, Dennis changed his initial statement to police, admitting that he had spoken to Amanda at times. According to Dennis, Amanda told him that people frequently broke into her apartment when she was away, but she did not report it to the police because nothing of value was missing. However, investigators had heard this story many times before and now suspected Dennis was behind the break-ins. They believed he was hiding something, as his statement changed and lacked a clear explanation. When shown a photo of the dry erase board that read, "Dennis was here on November 8, 11, Dennis suddenly remembered writing it, contradicting his previous statement that he had never been in Amanda's apartment. Additionally, DNA testing revealed that his DNA matched DNA found under Amanda's fingernails and that his fingerprints were on a glass pane at the crime scene. This evidence confirmed Dennis's connection to the crime. After realizing that too much evidence was directly against him, Dennis changed his story again. He now claimed to have been present at the crime scene and tried to save Amanda from the attacker, implying that someone else was involved. When asked about the man's identity, Dennis refused, citing fear for his safety and that of his family. Instead, he provided a detailed description of the alleged perpetrator, a tall, 170 to 200-pound white male with light skin, blue eyes, wearing old pants and dirty boots, along with a t-shirt that read, "Why drink and drive when you can smoke and fly?" Detectives did not believe Dennis's testimony, as all the evidence pointed to only one person being present at the crime scene when Amanda was stabbed. They arrested Dennis and charged him with the murder of Amanda Plass. The trial began in 2016, nearly 3 years later. Dennis's lawyers defended their client, arguing that although he was present at the crime scene, he was not responsible for Amanda's death. They accused the police of mishandling the investigation and framing Dennis after they failed to investigate thoroughly. Dennis claimed that on the day of Amanda's death, the drug dealer forced him to come to her apartment because Amanda owed the dealer $500 or $600. He claimed that the dealer started stabbing Amanda with a knife when things got bad. Dennis claimed that he wanted to intervene but was unable to stop the dealer. Dennis also claimed that Amanda had grabbed his hand, which is why his DNA was found under her fingernails. Prosecutors presented a different version of events. According to them, Dennis broke into Amanda's apartment while she was away and left a note with his name on her whiteboard. Amanda discovered this, suspected Dennis was the culprit, and called him to ask him to return her stolen belongings, which led to 9 phone calls between Amanda and Dennis. Prosecutors claimed that on the day of the murder, Dennis returned to Amanda's apartment thinking she was at work. However, Amanda had come home and a fight broke out, leading to Dennis killing her. A 12-person jury found Dennis guilty of causing the death of Amanda Plass in July 2016, after hearing 8 days of testimony and deliberating for 5 hours. The court sentenced Dennis to life in prison without parole. The police department's internal investigation into the scandal surrounding the release of Amanda's photo was delayed for years. However, in 2018, Officer Jeffrey Gaudier was finally fired in connection with the case. Although he appealed the decision, he returned to work in 2020. Due to his misconduct and previous disciplinary actions, a commission demoted him to patrol officer. Amanda's law went into effect in Massachusetts on August 4, 2022. The law makes it a misdemeanor for first responders to illegally take photos of a crime scene, punishable by up to a year in jail or a $2,000 fine. Amanda's family also filed a lawsuit against the city of Choppy, which was eventually settled out of court for $100,000. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Blummel family. Roger Blummel, born January 17, 1965, was raised in a big, close-knit family with strong values. Even in high school, he was driven and ambitious. He worked in transportation and later discovered his talent in sales, where he excelled. Friends say he could sell anything to anyone, thanks to his kind, cheerful personality. He was always happy and loved making others smile. Roger enjoyed a fulfilling life and a strong bond with his family, but something was missing: a life partner. That all changed one day when he met the right person. Although the details of their meeting are unclear, a close friend recalled that Roger was immediately smitten with a young woman and confidently declared his intention to marry her by the end of the evening. The woman who caught his attention was Melissa. Born on January 1, 1960, in Wichita, Melissa grew up in a loving family of 6 siblings, although she tragically lost a younger sister in infancy. Melissa was a kind, diligent, and helpful person who always put others before herself. She started her career as a bank cashier and worked her way up the ranks, earning promotions through her dedication, teamwork, and strong work ethic. Her career was marked by success, ultimately leading to her appointment as vice president of the bank. The first meeting of Roger and Melissa marked the start of a lifelong partnership between 2 kindred spirits, who tied the knot in 1991. On the surface, the Blummels seemed to have it all. Melissa's rapid rise through the banking ranks, while Roger's charisma enabled him to successfully launch his own business venture. With a natural talent for bringing people together, Roger thrived on sharing good times with friends and spreading joy to those around him. In Melissa, he had found the ideal partner to share in his adventures. What's more, the couple's strong sense of social responsibility drove them to participate in and contribute to various charitable, sporting, and community-driven initiatives in their locality. The Blummel had an idyllic life, but it lacked one thing: a child to bring laughter and joy. After years of trying to conceive, they decided to adopt. A social worker introduced them to Kesha, who was putting her 2 sons, Tony and Chris, up for adoption. The Blummel wanted a closed adoption, but Kesha preferred open. In the end, the Blummel approach won, and Tony and Chris became part of their family, starting a new life. Tony was amazed by daily dinners. The kids quickly adapted, thriving in elementary school and beyond. They excelled in high school, making diverse friends and starring in sports like wrestling and football. Tony's wrestling prowess earned him 2nd place in a division competition, promising a bright future for the family. Tony's family life took a drastic turn for the worse during his senior year of high school. Until then, he had been a model child, but suddenly he became rebellious and constantly clashed with his parents, resentful that they favored his younger brother, Chris. He started drinking, breaking curfews, and even smoking marijuana, causing chaos at home and making it seem like all hope was lost for him to get back on track. Tony had always dreamed of joining the United States Air Force after graduating, but his new behavior ruined his chances. In 2013, he was arrested for a violent offense, and then again for driving under the influence, which meant his records would prevent him from pursuing a career in military aviation. Tony's life spun out of control after these events, lacking direction after high school. He shunned education and jobs, preferring to sleep in and get high on cannabis. Melissa lived in fear of his violent outbursts, and there was another secret the family didn't know. Since 2013, Kesha contacted her biological sons on social media. Tony was excited to reconnect, but Chris seemed unreceptive. Kesha was devastated after giving them up, relieved they were with a good family together. Reconnecting with Tony thrilled her, but she resented the family for allegedly turning Chris against her. Moreover, when Kesha learned about Tony's troubles with his adoptive parents, she saw an opportunity to reconnect with her son and swiftly extended an invitation for him to visit her. At the adoptive home, things worsened. Tony's rage boiled over, and he punched a hole in the wall. This was the last straw. The family realized they and Chris were no longer safe. After failed attempts to address Tony's behavior, Roger and Melissa made the tough decision to ask him to leave. He started by wandering aimlessly, but he soon understood he needed to take action to support himself financially. He got jobs at fast food restaurants, and, to make some extra money, he also sold cannabis. Despite having no fixed address and sleeping at different friends' houses each night, he eventually fell in with a group of young people who were heavily into drug abuse. Among the midst of despairing events, a lifeline emerged for Tony when Kesha extended an invitation for him to move to California and live with her. Tony seized the opportunity with eagerness, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Kesha's California residence. Accompanied by his high school best friend, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to pursue a life of drug dealing, he arrived filled with hope, seeking Kesha's support, who was well-versed in the drug trade, to establish a large-scale marijuana operation in the area, and even discussed entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that they had arrived to live in a small apartment, which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place began to be tense, particularly because Sean, Kesha's partner, had 2 jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Kesha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Kesha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was all the time under that bad influence. Sean reached a breaking point when she discovered Tony and Braden selling marijuana near her house. She told them to stop, citing the danger to her as the property owner. Then, she issued an ultimatum: get a job or leave the apartment. But instead of complying, the group banded together against her, eventually leaving for a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. However, without income, they couldn't afford the hotel bill. They didn't consider getting a decent job due to their financial struggles. Their initial plan was to head back to Kansas, possibly because Tony was familiar with the area from his drug dealings. After nearly a day of driving, they decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was during their stay that Tony shared an idea with his companions to kill his adoptive parents in order to inherit their wealth. Once they arrived in Wichita and settled into a hotel room they'd rented for a month, they focused on finalizing the details of this plan. Tony had devised a straightforward plan. He would kill Roger and Melissa, collect the insurance payout, sell off their assets, and use the proceeds to launch a more extensive drug operation. Tony was convinced that his original family would amass a fortune by growing and selling marijuana. He even pinpointed the ideal day to carry out the crime: Friday, November 15, 2013. This date suited him perfectly, since his brother Chris would be away, attending a wrestling event related to his practice. As a former wrestling star, Tony still maintained connections with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that evening. Tony hatched a plan to invite Roger and Melissa to a meeting under the guise of discussing their past issues and making amends. While they were out, Braden would bring Kesha to the empty residence, where she would steal valuables. Tony knew the location of a stash of emergency cash his adoptive parents kept at home. The plan was to make it look like a botched robbery. When Roger and Melissa returned, Kesha would kill them. Initially, everyone thought the plan was solid, but Braden later got cold feet and refused to participate. He did, however, agree to help by obtaining the necessary guns. As an alternative, he suggested his friend Andrew, a former high school acquaintance, who could drive Kesha to the residence and play a supporting role in the crime. Braden obtained 2 pistols from other criminals as promised. It's worth noting that there was never any plan to share the money with Andrew, who was hired to drive and provide backup for Kesha during the robbery in exchange for $11,000. Kesha would ultimately be the one carrying out the heist. In early November 2013, Kesha shared a photo on social media of herself with Tony, accompanied by a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Then, on Friday, November 15th, Tony's prediction came true. His adoptive parents agreed to meet with him, just as he had foreseen. The encounter took place peacefully. At the Blummel's house, a completely different scenario unfolded. Following Roger and Melissa's departure for the meeting, Kesha and Andrew snuck in, broke into the garage, and started searching through the house. They seized the chance to steal some small valuable items and the cash the couple kept on hand for emergencies. With the first part of their plan accomplished, Kesha and Andrew concealed themselves near the secluded residence, lying in wait for their victims to return. Tony called, saying his meeting ended and he was dropped off at the hotel. The wait was short. As the Blummel vehicle stopped, 2 attackers emerged. Kesha stood by Melissa's side. Andrew aimed at Roger. Melissa, still shocked, recognized the mother of the adopted children. She barely said, "Oh my God, Kesha," before a shot to the head made her collapse. Roger, frantic, tried to help his wife. Kesha approached, gun aimed at him, but it jammed. She tried again, Roger frozen in shock beside his wife's body. The gun finally fired, and he collapsed next to her. After the fatal plan was executed, Kesha and Andrew hastily departed in the vehicle they had arrived in. The Blummel spouses remained at the scene until approximately 9:15 p.m. when Chris returned from his meeting to find the devastating scene. He quickly called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home to find his parents semi-conscious inside their van. He described Roger as coughing and Melissa as nodding her head up and down, both with visible gunshot wounds to their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to attempt resuscitation efforts while emergency services arrived shortly thereafter to take control of the situation. Miraculously, the Blummel was still alive, their lives clinging to a fragile thread, and were swiftly rushed to a hospital. Meanwhile, back at the hotel where they were staying, Kesha appeared to suffer a panic attack, declaring that she urgently needed to take an illicit substance, which she proceeded to do, joined by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Kesha handed over the used gun and a wallet containing stolen cash and micas to be discarded in a nearby stream. Andrew disposed of the evidence in a nearby park's pond. The next day, Tony used the proceeds to start dealing marijuana, earning his first $100 profit. Tragically, on the same day, Melissa lost her battle with illness and passed away at the age of 53. Tony visited his father in the hospital, unaware that he had been previously removed from the Blummel's will and insurance policies. As it turned out, the 2 heinous crimes had been committed for nothing. In the days that followed, it emerged that Andrew had not received payment and was even unaware that Kesha had stolen cash from the Blumel family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. During the initial inspection of the Blumel residence, the police observed that the garage door had been forced open, and upon entering the house, they found everything in disarray, with items scattered haphazardly. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other valuables had been stolen. The authorities considered the possibility that the attack on the couple had been a consequence of their arrival, while the thieves were still inside. However, since the fatal assault had occurred prior to the couple's entry into the home, this initial hypothesis was soon dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, no significant fingerprints were found, although investigators did discover a book casing. Then the authorities shifted their focus to the victims' workplaces, suspecting that a disgruntled client might have sought revenge. However, this theory was also ruled out, so it was time to interview people close to the couple. Tony was first on the detective's list, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims. But he vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he knew nothing about the incident. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had returned directly to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. The hotel staff corroborated this alibi. Next on the list was Chris, who had discovered the bodies, but he was quickly cleared after verifying that he had been at a dinner with the wrestling team at the time of the incident. However, the investigators discovered an anomaly in his behavior. He didn't appear overly distraught, instead seeming lost in thought. When police pursued this lead and questioned him about his parents' disappearance, Chris promptly replied that one person came to mind. He added that the only individual who might harbor a grudge against their parents and possibly be capable of such an act was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities caught a fortunate break in their hunt for the culprits. A man contacted the police, revealing that a young acquaintance of Tony's had approached him to buy a gun. The detectives homed in on this individual, and upon digging into his background, uncovered a long history of drug-related offenses. Furthermore, they discovered he had accompanied Tony on a trip to California. The suspect was none other than Braden. Shortly after, Braden received a message from his family warning him that the sheriff's office investigators were seeking to question him about the Blumel case. The morning after, Braden voluntarily went to the police station. According to a press report, on his way to the station, Braden stopped at a pond to dispose of an item, allegedly the guns used in the crime, which had not been discarded as planned. As it happened, he was already under surveillance. And when the police searched the water, they found an unused pistol in the bag he had thrown away. Braden's interrogation lasted 3 days, during which he initially denied any involvement in the incident. However, he eventually cracked under the pressure from the authorities, confessing everything he knew, revealing that the idea for the attack originated with Tony. Tony Blumel, 18, and his biological mother, Kesha, 35, were arrested on November 19, 2013, at their hotel. Andrew, also 18, was taken into custody, and Braden, another 18-year-old, was arrested the following day. Initially, Kesha denied any involvement in the robbery and other crimes, while the 3 young men confessed. On November 25, 2013, the accused made their first court appearance via video conference, facing identical charges: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. Bail was set at $500,000 for the 3 young men and $1 million for Kesha. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at just 48 years old, he was reunited with his beloved Melissa. Following Roger's death, the situation for the woman and the 3 young men took a dire turn as they faced the possibility of being charged with capital murder, which carried the risk of a death penalty sentence. On January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were formally charged with 1 count of capital murder for allegedly killing multiple people in the same incident. Kesha also faced additional charges: 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year, by which time Braden had cut a deal with authorities, agreeing to become the prosecution's star witness in exchange for leniency in his sentence. In 2015, following a year of negotiations, Braden and 2 others implicated in the crime reached agreements with the prosecution. Under these agreements, the accused parties would not contest the charges brought against them, and in return, they would relinquish their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed to refrain from pursuing the death penalty and to dismiss certain charges. In a series of separate hearings commencing mid-2015, each of the accused parties formally confirmed their intention to plead guilty. Kesha got life in prison without parole for capital murder, plus 10 years for aggravated robbery. Her sentences will run back to back. In court, she expressed regret and respect for the victim's family, but denied involvement in the crime. She's still in a high-security prison today. Tony Blummel, known to all as Tony, received the same sentence as his mother. At the hearing, his aunt Christina read a victim impact statement, thanking authorities for justice and mentioning the love Roger and Melissa had shown Tony. Tony listened in silence, tears welling up. Christina told him he'd chosen his path, and one day he might understand the consequences of those choices. Tony's now in a correctional facility with a record of many infractions. A week later, Andrew was found guilty of first and second-degree murder, sentenced to life and 155 months. Last, Braden, who'd made a deal with prosecutors, was guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced to 242 years. His first release chance is May 28, 2035, but he's had 71 disciplinary reports for bad behavior. District Attorney satisfied with case outcome. Despite waiving appeal rights, Kesha tried and failed. Undisputed, Roger and Melissa Blummel's lives ended tragically. Kesha's excess-driven life led to tragedy, sparked by a descendant rejecting her. For his part, Tony repaid the couple's love and care with resentment, envy, and violence, opting for an unjustifiable path of substance abuse that ultimately led him to commit a double crime. As a consequence, Kesha's younger daughter was forced to grow up in a foster home. In contrast, Chris Blummel, with the support of his family, managed to overcome the ordeal and build a fulfilling life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Mackenzie Lueck. In the heart of Salt Lake City, the life of a young college student named Mackenzie Speth Lueck took a haunting and tragic turn. Her story is one of promise, mystery, and a relentless search for answers. Mackenzie's sudden disappearance shook her community, leaving her friends, family, and law enforcement authorities in a desperate race against time to uncover the truth. Mackenzie, known for her vibrant spirit and ambition, was a cherished daughter, sister, and friend. Her disappearance left her loved ones devastated, grappling with the uncertainty of her fate. A massive search effort was launched, involving local police, FBI agents, and volunteers, as friends and family desperately searched for Mackenzie, hoping for her safe return. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to fade, and then, on June 28, 2019, Mackenzie's body was found. Her death shocked and saddened many people across the United States, and her story became a reminder of the dangers of online dating and the importance of staying safe in today's society. Mackenzie Speth Lueck was born on March 8, 1996, to her parents Diana and Gregory Lueck. Her father worked in healthcare logistics and administration while her mother was a housewife. She was raised in the city of El Segundo in Los Angeles County, California, along with one older brother and 2 younger brothers. She attended El Segundo High School, where she competed on the swimming team and played water polo. Mackenzie was a dedicated student with a passion for art, music, and animals. She then attended the University of Utah, where she majored in kinesiology and pre-nursing. She was also a member of the Alpha Chi Omega sorority. As a student at the University of Utah, she expressed feminist opinions and left one of the major political parties to register with a conservative third party. Luke worked at a Salt Lake City biological testing company, where she would recreate the days when she used to bike to the Pacific Ocean by putting on her bikini and basking in the sun that shines on the high-altitude desert. She planned to have a career in health sciences, speaking to advisors about going to nursing or medical school, which she was going to graduate in May 2020. The Leck family lived a seemingly ordinary life. However, their lives changed dramatically on June 17, 2019, when Mackenzie flew back to Salt Lake City, Utah, after attending her grandmother's funeral. On that day, Mackenzie arrived at the Salt Lake City International Airport in Utah from California around 2 a.m. She immediately texted her mother, "Landed and love you, Mama." But when Diana tried to respond shortly after, she realized her daughter's phone was turned off. Furthermore, Gregory's attempts to call Mackenzie went straight to her voicemail, which made the Leck family genuinely worried about her well-being. On June 20th, when her parents discovered that her friends had not seen or heard from her either, they reported Mackenzie as missing to the Salt Lake City Police Department. For the next 2 weeks, while Diana, Gregory, and their 3 sons tried to do all they could to find Mackenzie's whereabouts from California, her Alpha Chi Omega sorority sisters stepped up to search for her in Utah. Together, they even created the now inactive Find Mackenzie Leck Facebook page to attract national media attention to the matter. As the investigators were figuring out what could have happened, they found video evidence that Mackenzie had been at the airport. She was then picked up by a Lyft driver and taken to Hatch Park in North Salt Lake, about 13 miles away. The investigators also searched her cell phone records, which confirmed she had been at the park. The detectives also learned she had exchanged several text messages with an unknown person called I, whom it was believed they met on a dating website and agreed to meet. Her last text to him was at 2:58 a.m. The cell phone data placed Mackenzie and A at Hatch Park at the same time, at 2:59 a.m. Mackenzie's phone also stopped transmitting data or location information at 2:59 a.m., which meant that her phone had been powered off. The detectives then tracked I's cell phone signal, which led them from the park to his home at 547 North 1000 West in the Fair Park neighborhood. The investigators realized that I's cell phone was at his home at 3:07 a.m., just 7 to 8 minutes after picking up Leck from the park. The detectives then decided to execute a search warrant at his home since he was the prime suspect in the disappearance of Mackenzie. As the search continued in A's place of residence, a neighbor reported that there had been a horrible smell coming from a bonfire fueled by gasoline in I's backyard behind a garage on June 17th and again on June 18th, in the same location where the detectives had discovered the freshly dug shallow grave. The investigators seized I's vehicle when they found a strong odor of gasoline and a red gasoline container in the trunk. They further determined that I had purchased a similar gasoline container at a local store at 9 a.m. on the morning Mackenzie went missing. After I was arrested, the investigators further analyzed his cell phone records. The records showed that I's phone was in Logan Canyon on June 25th, between 2:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. This was the same time and place where I had confessed to his attorneys that he had buried Mackenzie's body. The detectives conducted a thorough search of the area and found recently disturbed ground in a wooded area off the main road. In this location, they discovered a charred human body on July 3rd. The medical examiner's office determined the body was that of Mackenzie Leck. Mackenzie's arms had been bound behind her back by zip tie and rope. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma on the left side of her skull and ruled her death a homicide. On June 20th, Leck's father called the Salt Lake City Police Department to inform them that no one had heard from her since she arrived back in Utah. On June 28th, a Salt Lake City man, identified as Ayula Ajayi, was arrested and charged with the kidnapping and aggravated murder of Luek, along with desecration of her body. Detectives found that Luek and Ai had exchanged several text messages in the early morning of June 17th, with Luek's last text to him being at 2:58 a.m. Cell phone data placed both Luek and Ajayi in the park at 2:59 a.m. Additionally, prosecutors say photos of Luek were found on Ajayi's phone. The trial for Luek's murder was originally set for March 12, 2020, but was postponed to give prosecutors more time to go through the evidence and provide it to Ajayi's defense attorneys. A 3-day preliminary hearing was then scheduled for October 28, 2020. On October 7, 2020, Ajayi pleaded guilty to first-degree aggravated murder and third-degree desecration of a human body in connection with Luek's death. In exchange, prosecutors dropped charges of aggravated kidnapping and obstructing justice, and removed the possibility of the death penalty. District Attorney Sim Gill stated that the guilty pleas allow Luek's parents to begin to obtain closure and a measure of justice. On October 23rd, 3rd District Judge Vernice Treese sentenced Ajayi to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, Ajayi was sentenced to 5 years in prison for desecrating Luek's body. He apologized in court, but Gill told media that he did not believe the apology was genuine. Luek's parents gave a statement expressing their profound grief over never being able to witness their only daughter's wedding and the joy of seeing her have children. Luek's father said, "My daughter Mackenzie Luek was a sweet, amazing young lady with a bright future ahead of her. She was a kind-hearted person who cared about others. Now, I will not have the opportunity to see her grow and thrive in life." Luek's cousin stated, "This is a nightmare that you cannot wake up from. I will never be able to forgive what happened to her. I will never forgive the monster who took her life. Never in my life have I felt such intense anger as I have over the last 16 months. Never have I been so fearful for my own life because I now know how real evil is in this world." Ajayi was also charged with the March 2018 kidnapping of another woman whom he met through a dating app. The victim came forward after Ajayi was arrested for Luek's murder. A trial for this case was set for December 3, 2020. On October 7, 2020, Ajayi pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree forcible sexual abuse in connection to this case. He was later sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison for the crime. Ajayi was also charged with 19 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor. These charges were filed in August 2019 after the police found numerous pornographic photos of children between the ages of 4 and 8 on his computer during the investigation into Luek's death on July 2nd. A preliminary hearing regarding these charges was scheduled for October 1st, 2020. Ajayi pleaded not guilty to the charges on that date, but the pornography charges were later dismissed. The tragic death of Mackenzie Speth Luek was a devastating loss for her loved ones and the entire nation. Mackenzie had a bright smile, a passion for life, and dreams of making a positive impact on the world. But her life was cut short by a senseless act of violence. Despite the sadness and grief, Mackenzie's loved ones have come together to honor her memory and celebrate her life. Her sorority sisters remember her as a shining light, always ready to lend a helping hand or a kind word. Through her artwork, music, and love for animals, Mackenzie's spirit continues to live on, inspiring those who knew her. Mackenzie's story serves as a reminder that we must always be vigilant and stay safe, especially when using online dating services. But more than that, it reminds us of the value of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. Rest in peace, Mackenzie Speth Luek. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Wilson. In the spring of 1999, the community of Southport in the United Kingdom was divided into 2 camps. The media and television were filled with numerous interviews with Mitchell Quay, a man who, though unremarkable at first, had become a true folk hero. His sudden popularity was sparked by a scandal: the mysterious disappearance of his wife, Lindsay Wilson. According to him, one day she left home without a trace, leaving behind 2 young children. Her distraught husband appeared worried and abandoned, pleading for her to reconsider and return. Along the way, he shared details of their marital life, occasionally speaking unfavorably about his spouse. He believed her behavior was driven by a desire for a free and extravagant lifestyle. Mitchell mentioned seeing his former beloved driving around town in an expensive car, although she just passed by. Most likely, the grief-stricken mother had left her children for a wealthy fiancé. Despite the image portrayed on TV, in reality, he was enjoying a bachelor's life. As a result, one segment of the population sympathized with the lonely man, offering him attention and support, while the other doubted him and suspected him of a horrendous crime. While Mitchell enjoyed widespread attention, law enforcement continued to search for the missing woman. His persona did not inspire trust, and there were complications in the case. According to Lindsay's relatives and friends, the couple's relationship was different from what her husband claimed. Everyone who knew her considered her a faithful wife and caring mother. Therefore, they were convinced something terrible must have happened to Lindsay. Otherwise, she would have made contact long ago. Suspicion was fueled by Mitchell's words during a famous talk show. When the host asked if he had ended his wife's life, his guest said he would not respond to such an indecent question, then paused and added, "Wait and find out." What was the exemplary husband and father implying? Perhaps he knew more than he shared, or was he so confident in his innocence that he was just waiting for everything to fall into place? Answers to these and other questions are forthcoming. At 17, Lindsay discovered she was pregnant. Raised in a caring, large family, she hadn't imagined becoming a mother so early. She wasn't unprepared emotionally, but the fact that her boyfriend, with whom she'd been since she was 13, fled as soon as he learned about the impending fatherhood, both upset and scared her. Lindsay knew all too well the physical and financial demands of motherhood. The Wilson family, though loving and close-knit, had often faced financial challenges to provide for their children. Her parents worked tirelessly. Therefore, when Lindsay met Mitchell Quay 5 months into her pregnancy, she considered it a gift of fate. Mitchell, a 20-year-old, acted like a true gentleman, being attentive and caring. Most importantly, her delicate condition did not deter him. Mitchell assured her he had fallen in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her and raise the child as his own. At that time, he was earning well and even started working extra hours, so his beloved would want for nothing. The young couple's parents were shocked when they announced their decision to marry. They felt the 5-week-old relationship hadn't withstood the test of time and circumstances, and thus couldn't genuinely celebrate for them. The only thing Lindsay's relatives noted was that her former cheerfulness and good health had returned. At the same time, the new boyfriend seemed overly sweet to them, even cloyingly polite. Ultimately, no one interfered with their marriage, keeping their doubts to themselves. Red flag. The wedding took place in August 1995, within a close family circle. The majority of the guests were from the bride's side. The groom's side was represented by no more than 5 people: his parents, a brother, and 2 friends. During the celebration, Lindsay was ecstatic, believing she had won the lottery in life. However, the uneasy premonitions of Lindsay's relatives grew heavier when, by the end of the evening, the newlyweds had a dispute. The conflict unfolded before everyone's eyes. Something displeased Mitchell, and he started to shout loudly. It was unlikely that the reason was significant or appropriate for such a reaction. During the argument, he grabbed his new wife by the hand and started shaking her, which looked more than odd and threatening. Lindsay tried to calm him down. When the emotions subsided, the man apologized to everyone and later made light of the incident, emphasizing that it was just nerves due to the holiday bustle. At that moment, the girl did not give due attention to the situation and quickly forgot about it. However, in reality, it became one of the red flags in their toxic relationship. On February 5, 1999, a social worker officially reported Lindsay missing, expressing concern over being unable to reach her client. Lindsay had sought psychological support in a short period of their life together due to recurring incidents of domestic violence and had bravely reported the situation at home. After her disclosure, the social worker had been monitoring the young family. She informed the police that she had been unable to contact Lindsay for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. The dedicated worker mentioned that she repeatedly asked to speak directly to Lindsay, but received evasive excuses. During her visits, she consistently left her contact details, yet Lindsay never called back. The social worker found this situation unsafe and requested a welfare check. Law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, but were also unable to speak with Lindsay. Her husband, Mitchell, explained that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but did not consider her missing. According to him, on Christmas Eve, Lindsay had gone to a party with a friend and returned home early in the morning, somewhat intoxicated. They had an argument, and afterwards, Lindsay packed her belongings and left, without saying goodbye to the children. He claimed she left him for another man and no longer wanted any contact. The search for Lindsay began. During conversations with her relatives, officers learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th, appearing in high spirits, looking well, and her behavior was normal. Her family had grown accustomed to her troubled marriage. Lindsay's mother also reported that she had tried multiple times to reach her daughter on December 24th to arrange a visit to give Christmas gifts to the grandchildren. Unable to reach Lindsay, she decided to visit in person that day. Mitchell answered the door with the children and told her that his wife had left with friends and accused her of infidelity. However, Mrs. Wilson had long learned to take her son-in-law's words with a grain of salt. After giving the gifts to the children, she left. Detectives found it strange that no one had been concerned about the young woman's well-being for 2 months. However, there was an explanation. Everyone knew that Mitchell restricted his wife's interactions with the outside world, even with close relatives. They had previously experienced difficulty communicating with her. Therefore, it was plausible for Lindsay to drop out of sight for a while. Nonetheless, this did not mean they were not concerned about her. The news alarmed them. Everyone asserted that she did not drink and led a modest lifestyle. Moreover, her husband had forbidden her all contact with the outside world, not to mention meetings with friends and acquaintances. Mitchell told the police contradictory information that aroused the investigators' suspicions about his character. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell could simply let his wife go, and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. However, the situation demanded a thorough investigation. To this end, the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances and tried to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where the couple lived and its surroundings. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted by the time Lindsay's disappearance was noted. Some time had elapsed. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person. On December 15th, she was at the local post office sending several letters and postcards as usual. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day. Lindsay had visited despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea and a brief conversation, after which Lindsay saw her guest out. On the way, she slipped a note into her sister's hand and asked her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and, in the whirlwind of days, forgot about it. Regrettably, the older sister couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again. Over several months, investigators tried to cling to any information. They began to suspect that she was no longer alive, as she had not been in contact for so long. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence. However, the more they learned about the couple's life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. Shortly after their wedding, Mitchell and Lindsay decided to move away from their parents. They rented an apartment in Southport. Sometime later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the joy of the new baby was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment, he could be joking and laughing. The next, he became unbalanced and aggressive. Trying to maintain a fragile peace at home, she didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. However, loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations. Mitchell would kneel, beg for forgiveness, and profess his love. It seemed for a while that peace had returned to the family, but then the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening. They advised her to return home and end her suffering, but it was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time, her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control. He forbade his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricted her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Once, Lindsay confided to her older sister that she suspected her husband of infidelity. She told her about a woman who came to their home looking for him and was very surprised to learn he was married. That day, another argument erupted, but this time it escalated to physical violence. Gradually, physical abuse became a part of their life. To prevent his wife from complaining about him and tarnishing his reputation, the man began to limit her interactions, starting with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and later with her family. Despite being unhappy, Lindsay still tried to maintain contact secretly, fearing being discovered and punished. At the same time, despite the evident problems, Lindsay continued to stay with Mitchell. Along with her feelings, the comfortable life he provided was a factor. He earned well, supporting her and their child, paying the bills. She truly lacked nothing financially. The era of living in a gilded cage came to an end for Lindsay when she found out she was pregnant again. At that moment, she was certain she no longer wanted more children. It's only fair to note that Mitchell was good to his stepdaughter, even loving her. However, Lindsay deemed the current circumstances unfavorable for bringing another child into the world and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When her husband learned of this, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. That same evening, she packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family breathed a sigh of relief. There, she proceeded with the pregnancy as she had planned. Over time, however, she began to miss her husband. He wouldn't leave her alone, frequently calling and begging her to come back. Mitchell tried everything to prove he had changed, and eventually, he managed to convince Lindsay. Initially, everything went well, and it seemed as if their old feelings had returned. The couple was expecting another child. This peace lasted for 6 months until Mitchell had a severe anger outburst. Fortunately, he did not direct his rage at his pregnant wife, but took it out on the apartment. He smashed everything he could see, destroyed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and even stained the walls with blood and food remnants. He threw the television out of the window and smashed the car parked outside. The landlord demanded not only compensation for the damage and repairs, but also that they vacate the apartment. This situation worsened the family's financial position, requiring additional expenses. As a result, the couple had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. You can't run from yourself. In October 1997, their son Jack was born. Mitchell adored the boy. However, the relationship between the spouses became increasingly tense. Throughout their married life, Mitchell frequently left home, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a week, often over trivial or fabricated reasons. Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior, yet when he abandoned her again, she filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. Apparently, she realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own. Therefore, she reached out to a local charity that assists women in difficult life situations. They helped her find subsidized housing in another city. Lindsay feared that Mitchell would discover her new address or phone number, so she took measures to distance herself from him. After he made several threats, she even obtained a restraining order from law enforcement. Mitchell remained unpopular with Lindsay's relatives. They too wanted nothing to do with him. Ultimately, their communication nearly ceased. Despite all efforts, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. Thus, her circle saw no point in trying to save her anymore. They accepted the situation and stepped back. However, this time, her decision proved to be fatal. At the outset of the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance, Mitchell was initially helpful in the search efforts. However, as the case gained media attention, his focus shifted dramatically. He turned his misfortune into a public spectacle, becoming a media figure in the process. As Mitchell invited more journalists into his home, his abundant media appearances began to seem less genuine, with viewers often noting a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents considered their son-in-law to be involved in their daughter's disappearance, and detectives also viewed him as the prime suspect. Yet, the lack of direct evidence tied their hands. Searches were conducted not just at the couple's home, but throughout the area. After a provocative question during a televised interview, the antagonist became even more brazen, even declaring that the time would come when his wife's family would have to apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mitchell sent a postcard to the lead investigator on the case. Attached to it was a pack of hair dye. Instead of a festive greeting, Mitchell wrote, "I hope this covers your gray and gives you a bit more confidence," mocking the detective and displaying his own arrogance. In February 2000, Mitchell found himself at the center of a scandal with a tarnished reputation. It became known that he had been forging his wife's signature to receive social benefits, serving as another indirect proof of his involvement in Lindsay's disappearance and presumed demise. The investigators wanted to latch on to a financial motive. However, the suspect's popularity worked in his favor. Many supporters emerged, arguing that as a single father, he had every right to financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring the charges they desired. Nevertheless, they managed to charge him with fraud. Mitchell was brought to court for the benefit fraud and was found guilty, sentenced to a month of community service. This time, Mitchell couldn't walk away unscathed. The forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared more than suspicious. The number of angry comments increased. Eventually, the man's patience snapped, and he began lashing out, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. The case of Lindsay Mitchell's disappearance might have remained unsolved had it not been for a clue discovered by chance. On June 1, 2000, a park-goer noticed his dog acting strangely near the roller coaster at a city amusement park. The animal uncovered human remains. Specialists were called to the scene, and the remains were sent for forensic examination, which revealed that they were parts of a female torso. Genetic testing confirmed they belonged to Lindsay, who had been missing for a long time. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay had been the victim of a brutal crime. The focus now was to find the perpetrator. On June 7th, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. The detectives were determined, and after more than 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down under the pressure and confessed to the dismemberment murder. On December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister, Lindsay informed her husband that she wanted a divorce. This time, she was resolute. According to Mitchell, this news infuriated him, leading him to attack and strangle her. The incident occurred in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, stuffing the gap under the door to mask any odors. Realizing he couldn't dispose of the body alone, he enlisted the help of his brother Elliot, a butcher, who he thought could assist. Elliot was initially hesitant, but was eventually persuaded by Mitchell. While the children played in the next room, they dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, the murderer expressed no remorse or empathy. Instead, he seemed proud of his actions, stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led them to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs. Sadly, her head and one hand were never recovered. The forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay's. There was no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The final judgment at the trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001. The court proceedings were swift and straightforward. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. The court-appointed psychiatrist noted that the defendant showed all the signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. Just 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Lindsay family. One of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. In his farewell note, he wrote that he saw no point in continuing in such a cruel world and wished to reunite with his sister. As of 2017, Mitchell Quai has been eligible for parole. However, as of January 2023, his lawyer's requests have been denied 3 times. Lindsay's family, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released. Consequently, they have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. As long as the voices of the victim's family are considered, the criminal will continue to serve his sentence. Regardless, no punishment can bring Lindsay back. Experience shows that most women with domestic Stockholm syndrome try to adapt to their abusers throughout their lives. Even when their families come to their aid, they continue to act against their own best interests. In such cases, only deep self-reflection in psychotherapy can help. If the victim does not come to realize the recklessness of their actions, the end of the relationship will be dire. Scott Dean Ponder was born on February 7, 1973, and was raised by his loving family, consisting of his mother Beverly Guy and his stepfather Terry Guy. From an early age, Scott showed interest in cars and motorbikes that was greatly supported by his parents, who wanted him to improve his riding skills. They even got him a racer's license when he turned legal. Young Scott started taking racing as a lifestyle, even participating at the Daytona Motor Speedway in Florida. His sharp skills and excellent racing earned him numerous admirers and turned him into a local hero in the town of Chesney. Scott was also very social and preferred to hang out with large groups. People also loved Scott's company. Scott started the idea of the superbike motorsports first at his grandmother's backyard in the late 1990s, where he would repair bikes. Slowly, he started to upgrade his shop to a one-garage building in 2001. He even decided to take in his best friend, Brian Lucas, as his co-partner in the business, and the 2 young men started to expand their business further. They signed up with Suzuki for a dealership, and their business grew unexpectedly in a short period of time. Brian, who used to work part-time at the starting of the business, decided to leave this job to become a full-time manager of the store. With their hard work and knowledge, the pair started attracting a lot of customers, and the business started to bloom. Even though they were salesmen, they took utmost care when it came to their customers' knowledge about bikes or racing in general. Scott's mother, who first visited the store occasionally, now started to pay regular visits. Soon, she took up the job of taking care of the accounting, payroll, cash drops, and other such work. With the trio, the business boomed, selling 100,000 motorbikes every month. Scott decided to attend an industry convention in Chicago. It was during this trip that Scott met his wife Melissa Brackman, a former homecoming queen from Stafford High School. They immediately clicked and started to enjoy each other's company, thus meeting up with each other often. As their relationship grew stronger, they decided to get married. Their love life, both before and after their marriage, mirrored that of a fairy tale where the love grew stronger every passing day. To complete their family, Scott and Melissa decided to have a baby, but unfortunately for them, none of their attempts were bearing any fruit. Frustrated, the couple sought medical attention and advice, and finally, after months of struggles, Melissa was pregnant with a little baby boy in October of 2003. With millions of sales in the very first year of business, Scott knew he had to expand his store even more. In order to do this, he required more hands on deck and decided to hire a new mechanic, Chris Sherbert. Chris was quite well known around town for his skilled use of the wrench that attracted Scott towards him. The four of them, Scott, Everly, Brian, and Chris, became a sort of a dream team, and their business started to gain attention even outside the small town of Chesney. Everything was going perfectly for the young and talented Scott Ponder until the arrival of his doomsday. Living such a perfect life, Scott never imagined his happiness to be cut short, but this was what happened on November 6, 2003. It was a normal day with not a cloud in the sky, and the sun was beaming, but it was not the case at the Superbike Motorsports. Scott and the others started their day at the shop like any other. There were few customers browsing items in the store. One of them was Kelly Sisk, who had his 4-year-old son with him. He was going to buy a go-kart for his family, and after paying for it, he hung around in the shop for a little while longer. Brian actually had the day off because he was paying to go on a holiday with his family, but he was called in by Scott because there was a customer who said that the bike was not tended to as they promised. Brian came to the shop and immediately started to work on the customer's bike. Scott was tending to another customer when Beverly came by after taking Scott's cancer-stricken grandmother to chemo. She used to take deposits for her son to the bank, and that day she was intending to do the same. When she dropped by, she started to help Scott a little at the counter since she was planning to go to the bank much later. At around 2:30 p.m., Scott's friend Noah Lee called the shop. Beverly answered the phone and he asked if he could stop by the shop, and it would only take him 7 minutes for him to reach the shop, to which Beverly agreed. The conversation was short, and after putting the phone back down, Beverly decided to use the bathroom. In the span of 7 minutes, all 4 people in the shop, Scott, Brian, Beverly, and Chris, were savagely shot to death in the Superbike Motorsports premises. At 3 p.m., when Scott's friend Noah came by, he saw Scott and Brian lying at the front of the shop as still as statues. At first, he felt they were playing a trick on him. He even lightly kicked both of them, telling them to stop messing with him until he saw the pool of blood underneath their bodies and immediately dialed 911. Police and paramedics immediately rushed to the scene. After all, it was the first ever quadruple murder in such a small town like Chesney. The news of the homicide spread like wildfire, and not only the victims found late, but a dozen other people gathered at the crime scene in order to catch a glimpse. The police wasted no time and immediately started the investigation. They found mechanic Chris's body at the back of the shop. It was bent over as if he was working on a bike right before he was robbed of his life. Next, they found Beverly's body inside the shop, right in front of the bathroom. The police believe she was ambushed right when she came out of the bathroom. The police found Brian and Scott's bodies both lying at the front of the store. Brian's body was closer to the door, near the sidewalk, while Scott's body was closer to one of the parked cars in the parking lot. This, the police inferred, was maybe because both Scott and Brian were trying to run for their lives. They went inside, probably on hearing the gunshots, and came face to face with the shooter. And on seeing the dead bodies of Chris and Beverly, they immediately ran out the door, but their attempt to escape failed miserably. The police and forensic teams searched the crime scene thoroughly and gathered blood samples and other evidence from the crime scene. This was an execution-style homicide, where the shooter entered the shop with the motive to murder the people present there and shot them in the chest and head point blank. Scott's wife Melissa got a call about the shooting and immediately rushed to the scene. Detectives conducted a thorough investigation, and it didn't take them long to arrive at their first clue. From the statements made by a few passerbys in the area at the time of the murder, they declared to have spotted a couple loitering near the shop. Sketches of the suspects were drawn during the questioning of these eyewitnesses, and the detectives immediately circulated the pictures all over South Carolina. The detectives speculated that the man was the one who shot the victims, Chris and Beverly, at the back, while the woman was distracting the 2 men, Scott and Brian, up front. When the man came to the front where the 2 men were, he shot them. This was just mere speculation by the detectives, and none of the facts in this theory were proven. Months passed and police couldn't find any clue regarding the case. Extensive media coverage of the case started putting pressure into the detectives as they started to revisit the crime from a different perspective, and sure enough, a breakthrough appeared. Detectives started to do a thorough study of the victims' past and current lifestyles, And though Scott, Beverly, and Brian's backgrounds came out to be clean, it was not the same for the mechanic, Chris Sherbert. When detectives checked Chris's previous job, the news of a drug connection came into the picture. The detectives found out that Chris might have been involved with the wrong company and was also responsible for smuggling drugs. Moreover, Chris was scheduled to go to court the following Monday before the murder took place. It was 2003 when drug smuggling and abuse was increasing every single day, and the police were hoping to arrest the key criminal players to eradicate the root cause of drug abuse, especially among young teens. The detectives and the public now started to wonder if this quadruple homicide took place with the motive to murder only Chris, and the other 3 victims were just collateral damage. They even started to speculate that maybe the people involved in this drug business felt that Chris would give evidence against them in court on Monday and decided to end his life. The detectives said that this could be a possibility since Chris was the one who was shot first. However, regarding this path of speculation, no evidence was found by the police. Therefore, the investigation stalled again. Finally, after a whole year, the detectives approached the case from a completely different angle once again. The detectives found that Brian, Scott's friend and co-worker, was looking for a house weeks before the murder, but strangely enough, his wife Robin had no idea regarding this decision taken by him. Later, Brian's mother, Lorraine Lucas, spoke of the unhappy and strained marriage between the pair and how Brian was planning to move out to live alone. Though this didn't seem to have a connection to the shooting, a discovery made by the detectives a few days later brought out a shocking revelation to the case. This quadruple homicide took the lives of 4 people and broke the hearts of many others. The victims' families were coping with the hard times, but it was especially hard for Melissa. Her life was perfect before it all came crashing down when her beloved husband was shot. Despite all this, Melissa knew she couldn't give up now that she had a new reason to continue living, and that was her son. When Melissa's son, Scott Ponder Jr., was born in June 2004, Melissa was still being called upon by the police at intervals for interrogation. In one such incident, the police collected the DNA sample of Scott Jr. from a discharged diaper when Melissa had changed him at the station itself. The results of the DNA test left everyone dumbfounded. According to the reports, Scott Jr. was not the child of Scott, but Brian, since his DNA matched with Brian's found at the crime scene. This created tension between Melissa and her father-in-law, William Ponder, who kept asking her if this was true. The detectives started to approach this case from the point of a possible love triangle between Scott, Melissa, and Brian. Questions about her being unfaithful to her husband spread all throughout the neighborhood. Moreover, Brian's mother stated that it was possible for Brian to have an affair, considering how unhappy Brian was in his marriage, and the thought of divorce might have crossed his head at times. Melissa was called multiple times to the police station for interrogation about her affair, but she was resolute. She said that both she and Scott had struggled a lot to conceive this baby, and Scott Jr. was undoubtedly Scott Ponder's child. She later told about how she was harassed every day by the same questions when she knew it was hers and Scott's baby. For the next year and a half, detectives kept track of every move made by Melissa in order to find a breakthrough. Finally, after 18 months, however, the detectives claimed that there must have been a mistake regarding the blood sample collected at the crime scene. The detectives stated that they conducted a DNA test for Beverly and Scott from the blood sample collected from the crime scene, and the results did not match. In the reports, Brian's DNA matched Beverly's when clearly Scott was the son of Beverly. At this point, the detectives knew that they had made a grave mistake. They put the wrong name in the blood sample of Scott and Brian collected from the crime scene, since both the bodies of Scott and Brian were lying next to each other. This cleared up all the accusations laid against Melissa. Disregarding the love triangle theory, detectives now started to link the case with another homicide, just 30 miles away, that had happened just 5 months before the Superbike Motorsports homicide. On May 16, 2003, the people of Greer, South Carolina heard the news of a triple homicide that took place in the Blue Ridge Savings Bank. Sylvia Holtz-Claw was on duty that day, though she had a day off. Soon a local couple, Eb and Maggie Barnes, visited the bank. At around 1:30 p.m., a 911 call went through to the Greer Police Department regarding a shooting that had taken place in the Blue Ridge Savings Bank, where Sylvia, Eb, and Maggie were shot to death. Just like in the Superbike Motorsports, the shooting happened in broad daylight with no witnesses available. When police checked the CCTV footage, they saw a red car that was driving to the bank at around 1:24 p.m., and it was seen again when it was driving back from the bank 3 minutes after the incident. Coincidentally, a similar red car was spotted during the quadruple homicide at the Superbike Motorsports. Detectives started to hunt down the right car and found a clue that it was stolen by 39-year-old Emerson Wright from a rental lot days before the homicide. The police concluded that he'd entered the bank to rob, but panicked and shot the couple when they tried to intervene. Unfortunately, the detectives never got to question Emerson regarding the bank and the Superbike Motorsports murder because of how incidents unfurled 2 years later in another car chase involving him and the Georgia State Police. He was wanted for a series of burglaries in the Atlanta area. When he was chased by the state trooper, he crashed his car, got out, and shot himself with a single gunshot wound to his head. Later, the detectives declared that though there are similarities between the two cases, they didn't believe that the two cases were connected. Left with no clues or possible theories to continue their investigation, the quadruple homicide at the Superbike Motorsports turned into a cold case months later in 2004. For 13 years, Melissa, along with the other families of the victims, didn't stop with their efforts of finding any clue that might lead them to the person who is responsible for this atrocious crime, but to no avail. Finally, a ray of hope shone on them when the cold case of the quadruple murder that took place on November 6, 2003 in Superbike Motorsports reopened when the detectives got a breakthrough in the case in 2016, 13 years after the crime had been committed. The man behind the shooting came into the spotlight when he was arrested for a different murder that he committed, and during the interrogation, he confessed to the Superbike Motorsports quadruple murder. This man was 45-year-old Todd Colehep. Todd was born on March 7, 1971, to mother Reggie Tague and father William Samsel. His parents divorced when he was 2 years old, and though he started to live with his mother and a new boyfriend, he wanted to spend more time with his biological father. Todd was extremely aggressive and hyper, at times not having self-resistance over his anger issues. He was a troublesome kid and showed hostility towards animals when he was in nursery school. He killed a goldfish with Clorox bleach and shot a dog with a BB gun. He spent 3.5 months in Georgia Psychiatric Hospital, but there seemed to be no change in his aggressive behavior. His mother, Reggie, finally decided to send him to his father, William, hoping a change in the environment would help his behavior. On November 25, 1986, Todd planned a kidnapping of a girl named Christy Granado in Tempe, Arizona. He knocked on her door, threatened her with a .22 caliber revolver, and demanded for her to follow him to his house. He brought her to his home, tied her up, taped her mouth shut, and then proceeded to assault her. Afterwards, he walked her home and threatened to kill her entire family if she told anyone about what had happened. Christy, however, confessed everything to her parents, and her father called 911 immediately. Colehep was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and committing a dangerous crime against children. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to the kidnapping charge, and the other charges were dropped. When he was released, Todd was a changed man. He started to work for himself and even got a job. No further complaints were heard against them until 2016. On August 31, 2016, 30-year-old Calla Brown and her boyfriend, the 32-year-old Charlie David Carver, went missing after they were last seen going to Todd's house to remove brush from one of Todd's properties. On November 3, 2016, investigators found Calla chained to a wall inside a metal storage container on the property of Todd. Later, investigators also retrieved the body of Charlie that had multiple gunshot wounds in it. Calla told the detectives that Todd shot Charlie and took her chained up. He would always assault her in a barbaric manner and threatened her not to find ways to escape. Todd was immediately arrested by the police and taken in for questioning. During this arrest, Todd confessed to being the person behind the shooting that took place at the Superbike Motorsports 13 years earlier. When Todd was called in for the interrogation on November 5, 2016, he started to tell the detectives everything that happened on November 6, 2003. He didn't confess out of fear or guilt, but merely as if recalling a memory. He said that he bought a Suzuki GSXR 750 from Superbike Motorsports, but just days after buying the bike, he realized he couldn't ride it. Having no prior knowledge of riding a bike, Todd then decided to exchange the bike for another one that would be much easier to ride for a beginner such as Todd. He then told the detective that he was mocked by Scott and Brian for his inability to ride such a bike. The bike exchange didn't take place that day, and Todd returned home. 14 days after the purchase, the bike got stolen from the front of the apartment complex where Todd lived. He filed a police complaint regarding the stolen bike, but the police never found the vehicle. Todd also mentioned that even the law enforcement officer made fun of him. He lost a $1,000 deposit for insurance, but neither the police nor the shop contacted him after that regarding the stolen bike. Todd started college and went to Greenfield Tech. His attraction towards bikes never faded, and soon he found himself going back to the superbike motorsports once again. He told the police that when he was browsing through the bikes in the shop, both Scott and Brian were giving negative remarks about him. Since then, whenever Todd visited the shop, the two men would mock and laugh at him. One day, he decided to take up a red 92 FS with him when he went to the shop. He waited for the customers to leave, and the shop was left with only Scott, Brian, Chris, and Beverly. Todd savagely shot all the victims to death. Though later he added that Beverly was not a target. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hearing the confession made by Todd gave the victims' families the long-drawn justice and the closure that they were seeking for the past. Later, Todd also confessed to have killed 3 more people who were Johnny Joe and Megan Lee Coxey and Charlie David Carver. These 3 victims also died due to gunshots fired by Todd Colheap. In the case of Todd Colheap, even though it was a serial killer case, there was no trial that took place. Instead, prosecutors spoke to the families of those he'd murdered as well as to the survivor and decided to give him a plea deal instead of taking him to trial, where the state offered Todd life without the possibility of parole, which he accepted only 7 months after his arrest. Todd was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences on May 23, 2017. In addition, he was sentenced to 30 years for assault and 30 years for kidnapping. Not having a trial did not give the satisfaction to the victims' families regarding the justice that was needed to be served. It also angered the general public. It's not fair for families to wait years and years for justice, 7th Circuit Solicitor Barry Bangap later told reporters. But Scott Ponder's wife Melissa said that she was finally relieved to get closure regarding her husband's death after all these years. All the family members and relatives of the victims came together to hold a candlelight vigil in remembrance of their beloved ones whom they'd lost to the hands of a serial killer. After 13 drawn-out years of pain and suffering, the victims' families were grateful to finally learn what exactly happened to their loved ones. In one interview, Scott's wife Melissa did state that the reason Todd gave for murdering Scott and the others didn't sit right with her, since she knew Scott well enough to know that he'd never make fun of someone and make them feel little in front of him. Nevertheless, she was grateful that justice had finally been served. The public was left disturbed by the lack of empathy and the casual behavior that Todd showed while being interrogated by the police or during his court appearances. They wanted Todd to receive the death penalty since he was a monster to society. Today's case was truly a twisted and disturbing one. Every relationship of a person is based on the pillar of trust, whether it's between parents and children, husband and wife, or even between boyfriend and girlfriend. But if someone breaks the trust of another person in these essential relationships and starts thinking badly about them, it feels really terrible. And today's case is somewhat similar, where a boy and a girl from Pakistan were very happy in their relationship. But then, after some time, the girl breaks up because she started seeing a dark side of her boyfriend. But then, what the boy did with his girlfriend shook the entire Pakistan. Shaukat Ali Muqaddam was not only a normal citizen of Pakistan, but also a diplomat and ambassador of Pakistan. Due to this, he had to live in different countries. However, in 2021, he was living in Islamabad, Pakistan. Apart from this, at one point, Shaukat Ali had also been Pakistan's ambassador to South Korea and Kazakhstan. Because of this, he held a very high position in Pakistan. There were a total of 5 people in his family, including Shaukat Muqaddam, his wife Kausar Muqaddam, 2 daughters and 1 son. October 23, 1993, was the day when a beautiful girl was born in Shaukat Ali's house, whom they named Noor. Noor was a healthy and cute baby who always laughed and never bothered anyone too much. Although Shaukat's professional life was very busy and stressful, but when he came home, he spent quality time with his family. As a result, his children had a very good upbringing. From school days, Noor had a great interest in studying. She always used to read either school books or other books. Now, because Shaukat Muqaddam was a diplomat, he used to get transferred to other countries due to his work, which is why Noor started her schooling from Ireland. Then she completed high school from South Korea. After South Korea, the family moved to Kazakhstan, but Noor thinks about completing her college in the US, where her older sister Sarah also lived. However, after the US, Noor returned to Pakistan, Islamabad. As humble and smart as Noor was in her childhood, she was equally humble and smart in her adult years. That's why everyone at home trusted Noor and easily accepted her decisions. Besides, Noor loved animals, especially stray dogs and cats. She used to feed them whenever she had time. Although Noor belonged to a wealthy family, she never had a liking for materialistic things. By hearing all these things, you must have understood that Noor was a kind-hearted, down-to-earth, intelligent and confident girl. Along with all these things, Noor also had a great passion for art and calligraphy. She often made religious paintings too. As I mentioned, coming from a wealthy diplomat family, parties were a common occurrence at the diplomats' homes. So Shaukat Muqaddam often took his family to such parties because they were excellent for networking and building connections. It was at one such party in 2018 that Noor met a boy named Zahir Jaffer. Zahir and Noor are both going to be key characters in this case. So before we proceed, let's take a brief look at Zahir's background. Zahir Jaffer was born in the USA, but he spent his childhood and teenage years in Pakistan. After that, Zahir pursued his graduation in the US and also spent some time living in the UK. Zahir's father was Zakir Jaffer, who was a very successful businessman. Due to his father's business ventures, the Jaffer family was one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. The Jaffer family had various businesses, including healthcare, oil, real estate, and construction. This also provided them with opportunities to work with their country's military. One of these companies is Ahmed Jaffer and Company, where Zahir Jaffer is now the CEO, while his father, Zakir Jaffer, used to oversee the company. But after some time, Zahir's mood changed, and he started working as a therapist at a company called Therapy Works. In this company, Zahir used to listen to the children of the school and explain to them about mental health care. He also used to arrange lectures and presentations for the children. But the shocking thing here is that Zahir himself was an introverted and angry since childhood. He also had very few friends, and he rarely attended parties with them. But it is at one such party that he meets Noor, and he likes her, and Noor also enjoys talking to Zahir. Perhaps this happened because their personalities were different, and people say that opposite personalities are attracted to each other. However, both their families already knew each other because they used to attend such parties. But friendship between Noor and Zahir developed from this party. Then, after some time, this friendship turned into love, and they both entered into a romantic relationship. However, it's not like they kept this fact hidden from their parents or friends. Rather, both their families and friends knew that Zahir and Noor were dating. Both families were happy because Noor completes Zahir and Zahir completes Noor. Actually, Noor brought out a side of Zahir that no one had seen before, whereas Zahir used to be very introverted before. But as soon as he met Noor, his personality began to change gradually. He started enjoying his life, hanging out with people, and at one party, people were surprised to see Zahir dancing with Noor, including Zahir's family, because they had never thought they would see this side of Zahir's personality. Everything was going well, but as the relationship grew older, things started to deteriorate. Initially, everything was going well in the relationship. Both were enjoying themselves, and their families were also very happy. But then, after some time, a different side of Zahir came out in front of Noor. Actually, Noor later finds out that Zahir is a very aggressive and abusive man. Allegedly, Zahir had physically and mentally abused Noor several times. Not only that, Zahir had also raised his hand against his own mother before. As a result, after almost 3 years of relationship, When Noor couldn't bear Zahir anymore, she broke up with him at the beginning of 2021. In both families, there was dissatisfaction over their children ending the relationship. Because neither of them was a normal family, and in such affluent households, it's not typical for a boy and a girl to enter a relationship, break up shortly after, and then enter into a relationship with someone else later. In fact, people like them also see relationships as a business. Like most wealthy families, they marry off their sons or daughters where they can profit. But besides that, Zahir was also displeased that Noor left him, and now he took it as an affront to his male ego. However, after some time, Zahir also started thinking about moving on, and then he thought he would go back to the US and settle there because he also had US citizenship along with Pakistani citizenship. Now let's jump to July 18th, 2021. On this day, Zahir booked a taxi to go to Islamabad International Airport. Actually, according to Pakistan Standard Time, Zahir's flight to New York was at 3:50 a.m. on July 19th. He had already packed his bags and informed his family about it. But before leaving, he wanted to meet Noor just once, so he called Noor on the evening of July 18th. At that time, Noor was at her home, preparing for Eid with her family. Now, Zahir called Noor and requested, "I am leaving this country for New York, and I will never come back here again, but I will settle in the US, so please meet me once before I leave." Additionally, Zahir told Noor, "Come to my house, we'll meet, and then when I leave for the airport from my house, I'll drop you off at your home first." Although these two had already broken up, before that they had been in a relationship for 3 years, which led Noor to say yes to meeting Zahir. After that, at 9:05 p.m., Noor leaves her house. But she doesn't tell her family that she's going to Zahir's house. She just says she's going to her friend's house and will be back soon. Around 10 p.m., Noor arrives outside Zahir's house at the scent location in Sector F74. But strange things start happening from here. Now, as I told you, Zahir's flight was at 3:50 a.m., but between 10 and 11 p.m., Zahir calls his travel agency multiple times. Zahir called his travel agency and started asking them very strange questions like, "What would happen if I don't board this flight? Will I get my refund back? If I decide to book tickets again after 10 days, what will happen?" Sometime later, Zahir called his travel agency again and said that now I'm not canceling my ticket, but I've decided to go to the US on this flight. But let me tell you, during this time, Noor was inside his house with him. But for her, this house was a new place because she had never been here before. Afterward, the taxi that Zahir had booked to go to the airport also arrives outside Jathar's house at exactly 11 p.m. However, Zahir doesn't come out of the house for half an hour. Meanwhile, the taxi driver called Zahir 2 or 3 times, but Zahir told him to wait, saying, "I'll be there in just 5 minutes." However, at 12:07 a.m., he calls the taxi driver again and says, "My plan to go to the airport is canceled now. Anyway, if we leave for the airport now, I won't be able to catch my flight." Despite waiting for more than an hour, Zahir pays the taxi driver half the fare. Actually, Zahir had booked this taxi for 2,000 Pakistani rupees. Now, after that, the taxi driver leaves from there. But at 1:40 a.m., Zahir calls the taxi driver again and asks him to come back to his house. Now, the taxi driver also returns to Zahir's house because he knew he would get the full payment. But this time too, Zahir made the taxi driver wait outside the house for a few minutes, and then at 2:15 a.m., Zahir comes out with his luggage. But the strange thing this time was that Noor was also with him, and she didn't have sandals on her feet, which the driver found very strange. However, what struck him as even strange was that Zahir was talking to Noor during the car ride, but Noor wasn't responding to his words. Although the driver didn't pay much attention to this at the time, halfway through, Zahir told the driver, "Now take the car back towards home anyway. We're already very late. I don't think we'll make it to the airport on time and catch the flight." After that, the taxi driver drops them off again at Jaffar's house at 2:35 a.m. But as soon as Noor got out of the taxi, Zahir pulled her inside the house. According to the taxi driver's statement, he felt like Noor wasn't supposed to go back inside the house with Zahir, but Zahir forcefully took her inside. Then, on July 19th, Noor stayed at Zahir's house the whole day, and then July 20th arrived, which was the day of Eid. Noor had come to Zahir's house to meet him on July 18th at 9:05 p.m., but now it had been more than 24 hours, and Noor's father and mother had returned home after shopping for Eid. But when they find out that their daughter has been missing from home for 24 hours, at 12:57 a.m. on July 20th, Shaukat Muqaddam texts his daughter, asking her where she is. However, Noor doesn't reply to that text message. Then, at 5:48 a.m., Noor's mother messages her, and two family friends also call Noor, yet there is no response from Noor. This causes worry for Noor's parents, and they were about to inform the police about it. But at 10:43 a.m., Noor sends a voice recording to her mother. However, the contents of that recording were never made public, but it was the last time Noor's mother, Kausar Muqaddam, heard her daughter's voice. But after sending the voice message, another strange thing happens. Zahir immediately calls Noor's mother from his own phone and tells her that Noor is not at his house, trying to prove that he hasn't even seen Noor. Then, from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. that same day, Zahir repeatedly calls his father, Zakir Jaffer. However, at around 7:10 p.m., Noor is seen on CCTV cameras. But by that time, her condition was very bad, and it seemed as though Zahir had tortured her severely. In the CCTV footage, Noor is seen jumping from the balcony of Zahir's house on the first floor and falling directly onto an iron grill. This caused her to sustain an injury to her abdomen, which is why she is seen holding her stomach in this clip. She was actually distressed by Zahir's harassment and wanted to leave the house. However, the security guard closed the gate, and meanwhile Zahir also jumps from the balcony to catch Noor and brings her back inside. But as he was bringing her back, Noor falls down, but Zahir drags her inside. Now, I should tell you that it wasn't just Zahir and Noor inside the house. There was also a security guard, a cook, and a gardener. But none of them helped Noor. In fact, from July 18th to July 20th, Noor attempted to escape from this house 6 times. But each time, one of Zahir's servants informed him, and Noor was always caught. But this time, because of Noor's attempt to escape, Zahir becomes very angry. After bringing Noor back inside, he calls his father once again around 7:30 p.m. But since then, Zahir didn't call anyone for 30 minutes, because in the meantime, Zahir first attempts to shoot Noor with his handgun, but as soon as he presses the trigger, his gun jams. However, even after that, Zahir doesn't stop wanting to kill Noor. It was already in his mind. So he takes out a Swiss knife and starts stabbing every part of Noor's body. Meanwhile, Noor scratches Zahir's face and arms with her nails, but after some time, Noor's condition deteriorates so much that she faints. Noor was unconscious, but even then, Zahir kept stabbing her with the knife. Afterward, he grabs Noor by the throat and keeps squeezing until Noor's last breath is gone. Later, Noor's post-mortem report reveals that she died due to lack of oxygen, but before killing Noor, Zahir ripped her several times. But Zahir didn't stop there. After Noor's death, he pulled out his knife and started cutting Noor's throat, and finally, he severed her head from her body. After killing Noor, Zahir quickly calls his father and friends, saying, "Thieves have broken into our house, and I need help." At the same time, some of Zahir's friends head towards his house. However, Zahir's father wasn't there. That's why he called the CEO of the company where Zahir worked, named Therapy Works, and said, "Quickly go to my house and save my son at any cost." In reality, Zahir's father, Zakir Jaffer, called the CEO of that company because they needed to erase all evidence of Noor's murder by going to Zahir. Moreover, the CEO of the company had to comply because Zahir's father was funding the company. Around 8:30 p.m., Tahir Zahur, the CEO of Therapy Works, arrives outside Zahir's house with his 6 employees. Additionally, some of Zahir's friends were also present. However, the door of Zahir's house remained closed, so Tahir took a ladder and, with his employees, entered through the window on the first floor. But as soon as they reached the first floor, Zahir attacked one of the employees with a knife, piercing through his chin and tongue. Zahir was extremely angry at that moment, so 5 to 6 people quickly grabbed him to control him. After this, Zahir's hands were tied behind his back and ropes were also tied around his feet. But as soon as the people went inside Zahir's room from the balcony, they were stunned. In fact, there was blood everywhere on the floor, even on the walls of the room. Then they saw Noor's body in the center of the room, but her head was 3 feet away from her body. Now, everyone inside the room was astonished to regain control over Zahir, and after seeing Noor's dead body. But in the meantime, the neighbors were also quite alert, because when Zahir was being caught, he was screaming a lot, which made his neighbors call the police. After that, the police arrived there, and then on July 20th, around 10 o'clock at night, the police called Shaukat Muqaddam to inform him that his daughter had been murdered. Hearing this sad news, Muqaddam's family home was engulfed in mourning because their youngest and dearest daughter was no longer in this world. But Noor's family knew who had done all this, and now they wanted to punish Zahir according to Pakistan law, meaning the death penalty. After that, the police arrested Zahir, but now they were worried about how Zahir would confess his crime. But Zahir did something very strange here too. As soon as the police caught Zahir, he confessed in a short while that he was the one who had killed Noor, and he had done so because he loved Noor very much. He had even proposed marriage to Noor, but she had rejected his marriage proposal and later broke up with him. This hurt Zahir's ego, so he booked his and Noor's one-way tickets to New York for July 19th. But before this, Zahir had decided that if Noor agreed to go to New York with him, they would get married and settle in New York. But if Noor didn't agree, he would kill her. However, from July 18th to 20th, Zahir tried to convince Noor for marriage, but when Noor refused to marry him, Zahir finally assaulted her very brutally. Although all the servants in Zahir's house knew what Zahir did with Noor, none of them tried to stop him even once, not even daring to call the police, because they were afraid that if they did, Zahir would not spare them. Now, even though Zahir had confessed his crime in front of the police, when the case went to court, he was behaving strangely in court. Firstly, he entered the court looking disheveled as if he hadn't bathed for days. Besides, he shouted loudly in the courtroom, even abusing the judge. Furthermore, the police had to drag him into the court and out of the court forcefully. However, he was doing all these things to prove that he is mentally unstable, and because of this, he should be spared from the death penalty for the murder of Noor. If it were proven that Zahir is mentally unstable, then firstly, his punishment would be reduced, and secondly, he would escape the death penalty. Actually, Zahir had schizophrenia, and he wanted to take advantage of it by telling the court that he is mentally unfit. Actually, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness in which a person is mostly lost in the world of imagination and knows very little about the real world. Because of this, he often behaves strangely. But when Zahir's medical examination was done, the report clearly stated that Zahir is mentally fit, and whatever he did with Noor, he did it consciously. But this made it clear that Zahir was an abuser and an aggressive person. Besides, there were many harassment cases against Zahir in both the US and Pakistan. In this case, during the ongoing trial in court, the entire Pakistan raised its voice for justice for Noor. Rallies and marches were held every day. As a result, on February 24, 2022, Noor received justice, and Zahir was sentenced to 2 death penalties, one for physically assaulting Noor and the other for her murder. Additionally, his 2 house staff, Iftikhar and Mohammed Jan, were also sentenced to 10 years in jail. Looking at the photos, you wouldn't know much, but Zahir was a powerful, tall, and aggressive man with whom a sweet and innocent girl, Noor, spent almost 48 hours. And those 48 hours were nothing less than hell for her. So with this, the Noor Muqaddam murder case comes to an end right here. If you appreciate our efforts, like and share this video. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Thank you.